Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. In the quiet town of Eldridge Hollow, there stood an old Victorian house that had long been abandoned. For years, locals whispered tales of its haunted past, speaking of strange noises, flickering lights, and shadows that danced in the corners of the windows. The house, known as the Hargrove Manor, was said to be cursed, a place where time seemed to stand still, trapping the souls of those who once lived there. One crisp autumn evening, a group of adventurous friends, Emily, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, decided to investigate the manor, drawn by the allure of its dark history. Equipped with flashlights, a camera, and a spirit box, they approached the creaking gates that surrounded the property. The air was thick with anticipation, and a chill ran down their spines as they stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped significantly. The air inside felt heavy, as if the house itself were warning them to leave. Dust motes danced in their flashlight beams, illuminating the decaying wallpaper and the remnants of a once grand staircase. A foul odor lingered in the air, a mixture of mold and something far more sinister. Undeterred, the friends ventured deeper into the heart of the manor. The first floor was cluttered with old furniture covered in white sheets, each piece a ghost of its former glory. Jake joked about the dust, but the playful atmosphere quickly shifted when they reached the parlor. A cold draft swept through the room, slamming the door shut behind them. Startled, they turned to the door, only to find it inexplicably locked. "Okay, that's creepy," Tom muttered, his bravado drained. They banged on the door, but it held firm. In desperation, they turned their attention to the spirit box, hoping to make contact with whatever lingered in the house. "Is anyone here with us?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Static filled the air before a raspy voice crackled through, "Leave now." The four friends exchanged nervous glances. They tried to rationalize the unsettling response. It could be interference, a trick of the device. But deep down, they felt the weight of the house's history pressing down on them. They decided to explore further, convinced that this was just the start of their adventure. As they climbed the stairs, each creak echoed like a warning. The second floor was darker, the windows boarded up and the air thick with dust. They entered what appeared to be a child's room. Old toys lay scattered across the floor, and a faded doll sat in the corner, its eyes seeming to follow them. Sarah picked up the doll, a chill gripping her heart as she felt its cold porcelain skin. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. "Seriously? This isn't funny," Jake shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Let me out," Sarah cried, dropping the doll as a loud bang resonated from within the walls. They all turned, eyes wide with fear as a whisper flowed through the room. "Play with me." Tom, gripping his flashlight tightly, suggested they break down the door. Just as they began to push against it, the ghostly voice echoed again, louder this time. "Play with me. Join us." The walls began to tremble, and Emily felt a pulling sensation, as if hands were grasping at her. She shouted for her friends to hold on, but the door held fast. With adrenaline surging, they pushed harder, the wood cracking beneath their force. When they finally burst through, they stumbled into the hallway, panting with terror. No sooner had they escaped the child's room than they heard a crash behind them. The doll had rolled out, and from the corner of their eyes, they glimpsed a shadow darting down the hall. Whispers filled the air, growing louder, a cacophony of voices urging them to stay. "Let's get out of here," Emily screamed. They ran down the hall, but every direction seemed to lead them back to the same place. The house twisted around them, disorienting their senses. The once familiar staircase loomed in front of them, but they could not find the way down. The whispers turned into cries, 1,000 lost souls begging for release. With their hearts racing, They stumbled into a larger room. The parlor that had once felt so inviting now appeared to breathe malevolence. In its center stood an old mirror, tarnished and cracked, reflecting their terrified expressions. As they approached, the glass rippled like water, and they could see figures behind them, phantom silhouettes reaching out, their mouths moving silently in a desperate plea. "Look!" Sarah pointed, her voice barely a whisper. "They need help." But the others were too terrified to respond. They turned to flee, inadvertently shattering the mirror as they pushed against it. A deafening roar erupted from within the walls, the house shaking violently as if it were alive. The spirits unleashed their fury, shrieking in agony, and the shadows swelled around them. "Run!" Tom screamed. They bolted toward the hallway again, adrenaline fueling their desperate escape. The walls seemed to close in, the house narrowing its grip. Doors slammed shut, isolating them from one another. Panic surged in each heart as they fought their way through the darkness that in the chaos. Emily lost sight of her friends. Alone and trembling, she stumbled into a dimly lit room that appeared to be a study. Old books lined the shelves, and a heavy desk sat in the center, covered in dust. As she caught her breath, the whispers came again, more soothing now, beckoning her to stay. She picked up a book, its cover adorned with strange symbols. As she opened it, the words glowed, revealing a history of the Hargrove family. Horrific tales of madness, loss, and tragedy. Her heart sank as she read about the fate of the children who had perished in the house, their spirits never allowed to leave. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Jake appeared, eyes wild with fear. "Emily, we need to go now." She slammed the book shut. "We can't leave them. They need our help." "Are you crazy?" Jake yelled. "This place is evil." Just then, a chilling gust swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. They were plunged into darkness, the cries of the lost children echoing around them. Fear coursed through Emily, but she felt an inexplicable pull toward the book, as if it held the key to breaking the curse. With a deep breath, she dropped to her knees and began reading the passages aloud, reciting the names of the lost children, their memories swirling around her. As she spoke, the atmosphere shifted, a warmth began to fill the room, the shadows retreating momentarily. Jake grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away, but she fought against him. "They need us, Jake. We have to set them free." The cries grew softer as she read, the spirits responding, but a sudden crash from the hallway snapped her focus back to reality. The house screamed in fury, the walls shaking as if to shake her from her resolve. Just as she finished the last line, a blinding light erupted from the book, engulfing the room. The whispers became a chorus of laughter, joyful, sweet, and liberating. The shadows that had once been so menacing transformed into bright figures, children dancing and laughing, their eyes shining with gratitude. But their joy quickly turned to despair. The house groaned in protest, old boards splintering and cracking. They were angry to be cast aside. Emily stumbled backward, desperately reaching for Jake, who was pulling her toward the door. "Now, we have to go," he urged, and she couldn't argue. The spirits were free, but they were still trapped within the wrath of the house. In one final push, they staggered out of the study, the swirling shadows reaching out for them as they dashed through the halls in a last-ditch effort. The house let out a deafening roar, shaking the very foundation as they barreled toward the entrance. Just as they reached the front door, a blinding flash of light erupted behind them. They burst through the door and fell onto the steps, gasping for air as the house let out a mournful wail. Moments later, in the eerie silence that followed, they glanced back. The Hargrove Manor stood still, the windows dark and blank, as if it had never housed life or spirits at all. With trembling hands, they scrambled to their feet and ran, not daring to look back. As they reached the edge of the property, they paused, each of them feeling a weight lift off their shoulders, the burden of the lost souls finally resounding in sweet acceptance as they glanced back one last time. Faint laughter echoed on the wind, the whispering embrace of children finally free from their torment, their cries fading into sweet silence, leaving behind only the whisper of the pines and the cool night air. Eldridge Hollow would forever remember the night the shadows were set free. When I was a child, I always had a vivid imagination, particularly when it came to the idea of monsters and ghosts. However, when I turned 16, I learned that sometimes reality is far scarier than fiction. It was a chilly autumn evening. The leaves crunched underfoot as my friends and I decided to explore an old abandoned asylum on the outskirts of our town, a place steeped in rumors and urban legends. The locals claimed it had been closed for years after a series of unexplained disappearances linked to the staff. Ignoring the cold knot of fear in my stomach, I fueled my courage with teenage bravado and the belief that we were invincible. Armed with a few flashlights, we made our way through a rusted gate that hung off its hinges, the metal creaking eerily as we stepped onto the property. The first thing that hit us was the smell. It was a decay tinged with something far more sinister. The walls were covered in peeling paint and strange markings, remnants of a time long gone. As we navigated the halls, the air grew thick, almost electric, as if we were being watched. We joked to lighten the mood, dismissing our unease, but deep down, we felt it, a quiet terror lurking just beyond our sight. We made our way to the main ward, where the dim light flickered above like a dying lantern. The rooms were empty, though the echoes of distant whispers unwound through the corridors. My heart raced as I felt cold air brush against my skin, sending chills down my spine. I told myself it was just the draft, but in a corner of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Just as we began to settle into the morbid atmosphere, we heard a loud bang from down the hall. We froze, exchanging nervous glances, but curiosity got the better of us. As a group, we moved cautiously toward the sound, flashlights shaking in our hands. The light fell upon shattered glass on the floor of what appeared to be an old observation room. The atmosphere shifted. The temperature seemed to drop even further. Suddenly, one of my friends, Mark, pointed toward the window. There, framed in the dirty glass, was the shadowy outline of a figure that shouldn't have been there, pale, gaunt, and watching us with an intensity that paralyzed us in our spots. Something in its gaze whispered of madness, as if it had witnessed horrors we couldn't begin to comprehend. Panic set in. We turned to leave, but the corridor stretched on, twisting and turning in ways that felt wrong. My sense of direction vanished as the walls loomed closer, the air thick with desperation. I could hear the hurried breaths of my friends, anxiety brewing into a fear none of us could articulate. Then, one of the girls, Sarah, screamed. We spun around to see her pointing at an empty room, where we'd seen shadows moving. "Did you see that?" she cried, shaking uncontrollably. There was something inside the room, something that shouldn't be. We rushed past her, adrenaline pumping through our veins, our instincts screaming for us to escape. As we turned to flee, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and a deep, guttural laugh echoed from somewhere within the walls. It was a sound so wrong it felt as though the building could breathe. The shadows elongated, reaching for us as we scrambled to find the exit. Mark led the way, his face pale, illuminating the path ahead with his flashlight. Just when we thought we had found the way out, a loud crash erupted behind us. Looking back, I saw the dark figure materialize from the depths of the asylum, moving toward us with an otherworldly speed. We stumbled through the broken corridors, pushing past debris until we finally burst through the front doors into the night air. We gasped for breath, not stopping until we reached the safety of our car parked down the road. The comfort of the car's familiar surroundings offered little solace. The laughter still echoed in my ears. We sat in silence, wide-eyed and shaken, as we debated what had just happened. Some believed it was just our minds playing tricks on us, yet none of us could brush off the dread that clung to our bones. The next day, driven by an urge to understand, I returned alone to the asylum with a camera, determined to capture evidence of the paranormal. As I stepped through the entrance again, I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. I took pictures, each click of the shutter echoing in the silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. My heart raced as I crept through the halls, retracing our frantic escape. Each room seemed to hold the stories of those who had suffered there, their pain mixing with my curiosity. When I reached the observation room, I felt a pull to look into the very window where I had seen the figure. With a deep breath, I peered inside. Nothing. Just an emptiness that made my skin crawl. But then, I glanced down at my camera, the lens flashing continuously as though it had a mind of its own. I scrolled through the photos and my blood ran cold. In each image, specters appeared, faces twisted in anguish, shadows with hollow eyes reaching out. My heart pounded louder than my thoughts, and a fear tore through me as I realized I wasn't alone. I turned, ready to flee, but before I could move, the figure materialized behind me. Pale, with those hollow eyes piercing into my soul. The laughter, the same menacing sound that haunted my memory, filled the room, echoing the cries of the lost souls trapped within those walls. I stumbled backward, tripping over debris, feeling the cold slip of something long forgotten brush against my leg. It wrapped around me like an icy grip, freezing my thoughts. When I was a child, I always had a vivid imagination, particularly when it came to the idea of monsters and ghosts. However, when I turned 16, I learned that sometimes reality is far scarier than fiction. It was a chilly autumn evening. The leaves crunched underfoot as my friends and I decided to explore an old abandoned asylum on the outskirts of our town, a place steeped in rumors and urban legends. The locals claimed it had been closed for years after a series of unexplained disappearances linked to the staff. Ignoring the cold knot of fear in my stomach, I fueled my courage with teenage bravado and the belief that we were invincible. Armed with a few flashlights, we made our way through a rusted gate that hung off its hinges, the metal creaking eerily as we stepped onto the property. The first thing that hit us was the smell. It was a decay tinged with something far more sinister. The walls were covered in peeling paint and strange markings, remnants of a time long gone. As we navigated the halls, the air grew thick, almost electric, as if we were being watched. We joked to lighten the mood, dismissing our unease, but deep down, we felt it, a quiet terror lurking just beyond our sight. The wind howled outside as I huddled under the thin, threadbare blanket in my small apartment, the last remnants of warmth fading away like my sense of security. It was a typical bleak evening in October, the kind that invites a sense of dread into your bones. I had always loved the fall, with its vibrant colors and crisp air, but this year felt different. This year held an unease I couldn't shake, as if the shadows outside were creeping closer with every passing moment. It started a few weeks ago when I began receiving strange messages late at night. At first, they were innocuous enough, a simple hello or how are you from an unknown number. I dismissed them as pranks or spam, but as the days went by, the messages became more unsettling. They were often vague but carried an unsettling weight, like someone was watching me. I see you, one message read, chilling me to the core. I decided to ignore it, telling myself it was just a coincidence or a prankster looking for attention. But the feeling of being watched never left. Then came the tapping. It started softly, barely noticeable, like a distant echo of dripping water. In the deep silence of the night, it grew louder, a persistent rapping at my window. I would pull the curtains tight, convincing myself it was just tree branches swaying in the wind, but deep down, I knew. I could almost feel the presence waiting outside, lurking in the murky darkness. The tapping evolved into whispers, barely audible but unmistakably distinct. I would sit up in bed, frozen, straining to hear the words. They seemed to call my name, wrapping around my mind like fog, suffocating and relentless. Each night, I fought to dismiss them, chiding myself for letting my imagination run wild. But sleep became a distant memory. I decided to take action, thinking perhaps I needed to confront my fears head on. I gathered the courage to go out at night. Maybe I could find the source of the messages, the whispers, the relentless tapping. With shaky hands, I armed myself with a flashlight and stepped into the cold night. The air was thick, wrapped in a heavy silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I walked the empty streets, every shadow stretching longer, taking on forms that danced at the corners of my vision. I arrived at a nearby park, where I had heard the tapping before. The tree stood tall and ominous, branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. I felt foolish for being there, the chills racing down my spine making every hair stand on end. Suddenly, the whispers returned, clearer now, as if they were right beside me. "Are you scared?" The question hung in the air, palpable and heavy. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the rustling leaves. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, but the whispers only grew louder, echoing through my mind. "We can see you." Panic set in as I stumbled back towards my apartment, each step feeling like it took an eternity. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me, to find the familiar safety of my four walls, but the feeling of unease intensified. That night, the tapping was louder than ever, reverberating through the walls like a heartbeat. I curled up in bed, trembling, hoping for sleep but fearing what dreams would come. I woke to a darkness so thick I could almost feel it pressing against my chest. The clock read 3 a.m., that dreaded hour when nightmares often crept into reality. The tapping morphed into a frantic banging, loud and insistent, drowning out the frantic beating of my heart. It was as if whatever was outside had decided that waiting was no longer an option. The lights flickered, plunging me into an even deeper void as terror gripped my throat. I grabbed my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed for help, but the call wouldn't connect. It was as if I were completely cut off from the world. I felt a knot of dread deepen in my stomach, the realization hitting me hard. I was truly alone in this suffocating darkness. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood up to face whatever was out there. Armed only with my flashlight, I crept toward the window and hesitated. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside, heart racing in my chest. The street was empty. Headlights of distant cars flickered like ghosts in the distance. But then, in the shadow of the tree, I saw a figure, a silhouette that blended into the night, its face obscured. It stood completely still, staring directly at me. My blood ran cold as its mouth moved in a silent whisper, the words lost to the wind. I stumbled back, collapsing onto the floor. The creature seemed to realize it was seen and began to move, not toward me but rather to the side, slipping into the shadows like a shadow itself. Panic took over, and I ran to my front door, desperate to escape. I yanked it open, but as I stepped outside, I realized I was no longer in my apartment. I was enveloped in an endless darkness, lost in a void that felt alive. The whispers surrounded me, filling my mind with a cacophony of voices. "You shouldn't have come here." I turned to run, but the darkness itself wrapped around me like a cold embrace. My scream echoed into the void, swallowed whole and unanswered. Each night became a cycle, trapped in an endless loop of terror, haunted by the figure and the whispers that tormented every waking moment. I imagined it was only a nightmare, yet every morning would bring a new message on my phone, always taunting, "I see you." The last time I looked in the mirror, the reflection that stared back was unrecognizable. I was hollow, a specter of my former self, forever caught between the world I knew and the shadow that haunted me. And so, I wait, a nameless entity in the dark, wondering who will see me next, and hoping that one day I might find my way home. It was a sultry summer night, the kind where the air feels thick with the weight of secrets waiting to be revealed. I had just moved into an old house on the outskirts of a small, quiet town, drawn to its creaking wooden floors and the rustle of leaves outside. I was eager to settle in and make it my own, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The neighbors were polite but distant, their eyes betraying silent whispers that danced around the edges of my consciousness. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my imagination, but that changed one restless night. As I was lying in bed, surrounded by the muted darkness, I heard it, a faint whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, a product of the eerie stillness that enveloped the house, but then it came again, clearer this time, almost insistent. The sound seemed to come from the corner of my room, near the old wardrobe I had inherited from the previous owner. Curiosity tugged at me, urging me to investigate, but I hesitated. Ignoring the urge, I pulled the blanket tightly around me and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would all disappear by morning. But when dawn broke, the unease remained. Instead of feeling comfort in the daylight, I felt exposed, vulnerable. I decided to explore the wardrobe later. It had always felt like a relic, the kind of antique that belonged in a museum rather than a bedroom. That evening, armed with an old flashlight, I opened the wardrobe doors, revealing layers of dust and forgotten memories. Clothes hung limply, moth-eaten and faded, yet nestled among them was a small, ornate box. Its intricate design piqued my interest, and I pulled it out, brushing the dust off before flipping the latch. Inside lay a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting a family I did not recognize. There was something unsettling about their smiles. They seemed forced, as though happiness was a mask worn for the camera. As I sifted through the photos, a chill prickled at the nape of my neck. The last photo, however, captured my attention the most, a blurry image of a woman standing in front of the very house I now called home, her eyes devoid of warmth and her face a canvas of despair. I dropped the box as an inexplicable chill swept through the room, extinguishing the warmth of my curiosity. Suddenly, the air thickened around me, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hair on my arms stood on end as I glanced toward the now-closed wardrobe, feeling foolish for my earlier bravado. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, a side effect of the stories I had heard about the house being haunted, but rational thinking did little to ease my growing dread. I decided to seek out the neighbors to learn more about the woman in the photograph. Their responses were hesitant, as if they danced around some unwritten rule of silence. One of them, an elderly man named Mr. Walker, finally revealed that tragedy had struck in that very house many years ago. A woman had gone missing, leaving behind a family shattered by grief. As he spoke, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, a sense of foreboding looming over me. I didn't realize how deeply those words had burrowed into my thoughts until that night. Once again, the suffocating darkness of the house surrounded me, but this time, the whispers returned, echoing with urgency. I threw the blankets off, driven by a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the photograph was trying to tell me something. I approached the wardrobe once more, heart pounding, and opened its doors. In the shadowy recesses, I noticed the box still lay open, as if inviting me to disturb its contents again. I reached in and pulled out the photograph of the woman, staring deeply into her hollow eyes. It felt as if she were pleading with me, embodying a message that transcended the years. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I heard a soft thud behind me. Whipping around, I was met with darkness. Panic surged through me as I rushed to the window, desperate for light, only to see a shadow dart past my peripheral vision. The whispers intensified, growing into a cacophony of sound, overlapping voices that twisted into a single, haunting plea. I slammed the wardrobe door shut, but it only amplified the whispers, now sounding like cries pleading for help. I backed away, stumbling until I hit the wall, the weight of fear anchoring me. Suddenly, there was silence. The absence of sound was more terrifying than the chaos that had persisted moments before. My breath hitched, but before I could gather my thoughts, a slow creaking filled the air. A door somewhere in the house had opened. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever, and with the mounting dread, I felt compelled to move. I tiptoed out of my room, the wooden floors groaning beneath my weight, and ventured down the hallway. My heart hammered uncontrollably as I saw the door to the attic standing ajar, the faint light of the moon streaming through the crack. Something inside urged me to investigate, despite every fiber of my being screaming to run in the opposite direction. As I ascended the stairs, every creak resounded like a warning bell, but I was drawn to the attic's secrets. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and mildew, and I squinted in the dimness, searching for the source of the pulsing energy that seemed to hum in the air. In the far corner, I spotted an old rocking chair that creaked gently as if stirred by an unseen force. As I approached, the whispers returned, now distinguishable, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Help me," they echoed, tinged with sorrow, and I felt the weight of despair pressing against my chest. It was then that the shadow coalesced into a figure before me. The woman from the photograph stood there, her face twisted in anguish, trapped between worlds. I stumbled back, colliding with a stack of boxes, the impact drawing a feeble gasp from my lips. "Help me," she whispered again, reaching out with a tremulous hand. I realized that she had been lost, caught in a loop of grief and longing, and somehow I was her last hope. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but deep down, I knew I couldn't turn away. I had to understand her, to piece together her story and give her the release she sought. With shaking fingers, I picked up a dust-covered notebook from one of the boxes, its pages brittle and yellowed. It was her journal, started before her disappearance and detailing her struggles, heartache, and the slow unraveling of her life. Each word resonated with pain, revealing deep sorrow and despair. The entries were haunting, echoing her pleas for help as she fell deeper into a chasm of darkness. As I read, I felt a connection to her pain, and tears streamed down my face. The moment I finished the last entry, I understood what she needed. "I will help you," I whispered, the promise spilling from my lips, anchoring both of us in the moment. At that moment, the whispers morphed into a haunting melody, a lullaby of release. I felt her presence enveloping me, and the shadows around us began to shift, swirling into a dance of light and darkness. The weight of grief began to lift, and in that moment, I understood the significance of untold stories. All at once, the attic was filled with blinding light, and for an instant, I caught a glimpse of her, releasing the sorrow she had held for so long. The shadows retreated, and she smiled, a radiant light illuminating her features before she vanished into the ether. Suddenly, silence fell, a serene quiet that lingered long after the storm had passed. I stood alone in the attic, still gripping the journal, my heart aching yet lighter. I knew the house had been changed forever, the echoes of despair replaced by a sense of peace. As dawn broke, casting golden rays across the room, I felt an odd sense of closure. The whispers faded into a soft memory, leaving me with the realization that sometimes the stories we carry could transcend even the darkness, seeking the light they so desperately needed. It was a frigid evening in late October when I first encountered the terror that would haunt me for years. I had recently moved into a small, dilapidated house at the edge of town, lured by the incredibly low rent and the allure of solitude. The neighbors whispered about its past, stories of strange occurrences and a family that had vanished without a trace. I shrugged them off as mere folklore, convinced that my own skepticism would shield me from any supernatural nonsense. The day I moved in, I felt an unsettling chill permeate the air, as though the very walls bore the weight of untold secrets. As dusk settled in, I noticed peculiar sounds echoing through the hallways, soft whispers that seemed to dance just beyond the threshold of comprehension. I dismissed them as the creaks of an old house settling, but a nagging sense of unease gnawed at the back of my mind as night fell. The first few nights were eerily quiet, and I began to relax, believing I had been convinced by local tales that had fostered unnecessary fright. However, as days turned into weeks, I began to notice things, the sensation of being watched, shadows darting just outside my periphery. I tried to rationalize the flickering lights and unexplained cold spots as simple electrical issues, but deep down, I felt as if the house was alive, breathing, watching. One stormy night, lightning illuminated the room, casting ghostly shapes across the walls, and I heard it, a distinct voice calling my name, barely above a whisper, yet crystal clear. I froze, the breath catching in my throat as dread seeped into every fiber of my being. "Help me," it pleaded. I felt a shiver race down my spine. Surely, it was just my imagination, I tried to convince myself. Summoning my courage, I descended the narrow staircase toward the basement, drawn by the voice. With each creak of the wooden steps beneath me, the air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. As I reached the bottom, I was enveloped in darkness, pulsating with an energy that was both inviting and repulsive. I fumbled for the light switch, and when I flicked it on, I was met by a sight that made my heart race. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded and yellowed with age, depicting a family who once lived there. Their eyes seemed to follow me, filled with sorrow and despair, as if trapped in time and space, yearning for release. The last photo caught my attention. A girl, no older than 8, whose gaze bore into me with a mixture of pleading and warning. Her name was scrawled on the back, Lily. Just then, the disembodied voice echoed once more, "Find me." Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, knocking over an old, dust-covered trunk. It creaked open, revealing an assortment of belongings: the girl's toys, a dusty blanket, and a detailed diary. I hesitated before opening it, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The pages were filled with Lily's handwriting, detailing her life in the house, her joys, and slowly descending into fear. Fear of something dark that had taken root in their home. She spoke of shadows that moved on their own and voices that whispered in the night, much like the ones I had encountered. I could feel her despair seeping through the musty pages, a chilling resonance echoing my own experiences. The final entries took a darker turn, describing her family's descent into madness. The last entry was a frantic plea for help, abruptly stopping mid-word. My heart raced as the lights flickered and the temperature in the room plummeted. In that moment, I understood. The house was a prison, and Lily was trapped within its walls. I could feel her presence surrounding me, the weight of her sorrow pressing upon my chest. I had to help her find peace. The subsequent nights became a blur of frantic research and sleepless hours, diving into the history of the house. I discovered that the family had vanished shortly after Lily's final diary entry, leaving behind an array of unanswered questions and shattered lives. Determined to release Lily from her torment, I decided to perform a small ritual to honor her memory. I gathered items that belonged to her: her favorite toy, a lock of hair found in the trunk, and the diary itself. I filled a bowl with soil from the garden and lit a candle, placing them around the photographs. As I spoke her name aloud, the air crackled with an energy that both terrified and exhilarated me. The temperature dropped sharply as a gust of wind seemed to swirl around the room, extinguishing the candle's flame. I held my breath, waiting for a sign. In that moment, the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, and a shadow moved to the forefront. I felt a cold touch on my shoulder, a shiver running down my spine as I turned to face the dark form. There she was, Lily, with her hollow eyes and ethereal presence, radiating a sorrow that reached into my core. I took a step back, the room spinning around me. "Help me," she urged again, her voice a haunting echo in the silence that engulfed us. I needed to find the truth, to uncover the mystery behind her disappearance. After days of digging, I unearthed an old police report concerning the family's vanishing. Their story was one of desperation. The father had succumbed to madness, accused by the mother of practicing dark rituals that had driven him into insanity. The final words of the report spoke of a chilling discovery: evidence of a hidden room in the basement, a place said to be where unspeakable things occurred. Gathering my courage, I returned to the basement, armed with a flashlight and a crowbar. I pounded on the walls until I found what felt like a hollow spot. With a strike, the wall gave way, revealing a narrow opening. My heart raced as I squeezed through, the air heavy with decay. Inside, I discovered remnants of a dark history, symbols drawn in blood-stained dirt, remnants of incantations that resonated with malice. And there, amidst the debris, lay a small wooden box, engraved with similar markings as those I had seen in the room above. I opened it, revealing a faded photograph of Lily, her innocent smile juxtaposed against the haunting symbols, as if she were meant to bear the weight of something far more sinister. At that moment, the whispers returned, louder, more insistent, and I realized they were not merely cries for help. They were demands for vengeance, calls for liberation. I fled from the hidden room, and as I raced back up the stairs, it felt as though the house itself was alive, angrily reacting to my discoveries. The shadows twisted and stretched around me, grasping at my ankles as I fought against the choking darkness that threatened to consume me. I emerged into the main house, gasping for breath, filled with determination. Lily's spirit deserved peace. That night, I gathered everything I could find related to the dark rituals and the family, burning the items in a small ceremony, whispering words of farewell, hoping to sever the cursed ties that bound Lily to the house. As the flames flickered and danced in the stillness, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a lightness replacing the weight of despair. I turned towards the windows, and for the first time since I had moved in, the oppressive darkness lifted. The whispers had faded, replaced by serene silence. I fell asleep that night with a sense of calm, the air no longer charged with fear. But as dawn broke, the sun crested the horizon, and I awoke to find the house quiet, too quiet. The photographs that once lined the walls had changed. They now depicted a family in vibrant colors. Smiling faces replaced the haunting gazes I had once seen. Lily stood at the center, her gaze soft and serene, as if she finally found her way home. A tear slipped down my cheek as I realized my mission had been accomplished. I had freed her. As I gathered my belongings, preparing to leave the house behind, I felt a gentle breeze caress my face, carrying whispers of gratitude. I took one last look back at the place that had been both a cage and a sanctuary, where fear had once thrived but had now been vanquished. The world beyond beckoned me, filled with the light of a new day, and I stepped forward, knowing that sometimes facing our fears can lead to unexpected liberation. The night was still, draped in a haunting silence that wrapped around me like a thick fog as I journeyed home from a late shift. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pavement, and I could barely shake the feeling that I was being watched. This sensation had weighed heavily on my mind for weeks since I had moved to this secluded town, where whispers of the past hung in the air like the smell of decay. People spoke of an old house at the end of Willow Lane, claiming it was cursed, harboring dark secrets that seeped into the very walls, but I dismissed such tales as mere superstition. I was practical, grounded in reality, and not easily swayed by ghost stories told around campfires. As I approached the fork in the road, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm summer evening, and a silhouette caught my eye, standing motionless in my periphery. I turned my head quickly, only to see nothing but shadows where it had been, but the feeling remained, gnawing at the back of my mind. It wasn't until I reached my front porch that I noticed something odd, a detail that I had previously overlooked in my mundane routine. My front door, usually secured with a heavy lock, was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open and stepped inside, the air thick and heavy, laden with stillness. Every creak of the floor beneath my feet echoed in the stillness, amplifying my heartbeat as I called out, half-heartedly, to see if anyone was there. Silence answered, deeper, more penetrating than any response I could have expected. I scanned the dimly lit rooms, each shadowy corner conspiring against me, thicker with tension than the last. Drawn by an irrational curiosity, I ventured further in. The living room was untouched, the furniture exactly as I'd left it, but a strange sense of foreboding settled over me. I moved cautiously, my instincts screaming for me to leave, but a morbid fascination rooted me in place. The clock on the wall ticked rhythmically, a sound so mundane yet so foreboding in this moment of confusion. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting movement stirred. Was it a trick of the light, or was there something lurking? My breath hitched as I turned towards the source, but all I found was the empty room staring back at me, a dead silence enveloping the space. Just as I decided to retreat, the light flickered, plunging me momentarily into darkness before illuminating a figure standing at the far end of the room. At first glance, I thought it was a person, but as the light settled, revealing more of its shape, I realized it wasn't human. It was a little girl, or what looked to be one, her eyes hollow and dark, a smile too wide for her face. I stumbled back, the sheer horror of the moment gripping my chest like a vice. She was dressed in what appeared to be an old-fashioned nightgown, tattered and stained, as if she had risen from a grave. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice a chilling melody that sent shivers down my spine. I turned on my heel and ran, fleeing through the front door and into the night, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't stop until I reached the road, gasping for air, the houses around me bathed in the soft glow of their own lights, oblivious to the terror I had just encountered. I spent the remaining hours of that night tossing and turning, filled with dread and disbelief. Was it a figment of my overworked imagination? Or had I truly encountered something beyond comprehension? At dawn, I returned, determination overpowering my fear. The door stood invitingly ajar as if welcoming me back, but I hesitated. It would have been so easy to turn back, to forget that wretched place and its haunting memory, but something compelled me to push forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Instead of oppressive silence, I felt alive with an unexplainable energy, a force pulling me deeper into the house. In the living room, the girl stood waiting, her smile wider, her eyes never leaving mine. "You came back," she said, her tone dripping with an unsettling joy. I stood frozen, unable to muster a response. The other sounds that had filled the house previously fell silent, and suddenly, the walls around me began to breathe, pulsating eerily like a heartbeat. I took a step back, but it was too late. The environment warped around me, an uncontrollable force drawing me nearer to her. The room transformed, revealing images of sorrow and despair, a glimpse into the girl's past, a life cut short, filled with the anguish of abandonment. The sights overwhelmed my senses, and I could feel her pain enveloping me, a desperate cry for help echoing through my mind. I stumbled back once more, and in that hazy moment, I understood. The girl wasn't a threat. She was a soul trapped in a loop of torment, seeking solace in the living. It struck me then that I was meant to help her find peace, but fear rooted me to the spot like a statue. "You have to help me," she urged, her voice echoing in the depths of my soul. "Help me remember." A flood of memories crashed against my mind, visions crashing like waves, revealing the history of her demise, a tragedy buried beneath the weight of time. I swallowed hard, my resolve finally hardening as I nodded slowly, accepting the challenge. Over the following days, I dedicated myself to uncovering her story, reaching out to locals, unearthing archives, piecing together fragments of the past that revealed her name, Eliza, a child lost to the injustices of her time. Each night, I returned to the house, the girl waiting for me like a ghost tethered to her memories. Our bond grew stronger. Her stories flowed, weaving together a tapestry of sadness and tragedy. I found her family, learned of their struggles, their dreams shattered by hardship, and ultimately, their attempts to protect her that led to her demise. In revealing the truth, I felt the weight begin to lift from the air surrounding us. One night, as the heavy silence cloaked the house, the atmosphere shifted again, the energy more serene. Eliza stood before me, her expression softened, her eyes sparkling with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, a warmth radiating from her small frame. As dawn broke, the light spilling into the room felt different, less foreboding, more like a release. I saw the shadows around Eliza fade, the smile from her lips illuminating her face as she twirled like a wisp of smoke. "I'm free," she said, and with that, she dissolved into light, leaving behind a profound silence that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I stepped back into the world outside, the air crisp and fresh, the sun rising in the horizon, illuminating the path ahead. The house at the end of Willow Lane was still standing, but I no longer perceived it as a place of fear. Instead, it transformed into a monument of remembrance. I moved on, but a piece of me remained tethered to that haunting chapter, forever intertwined with Eliza's story, a bond forged in darkness that healed as the sun rose, lighting the way for souls lost in their scars. It was a chilly October evening when I decided to take a detour on my way home, driven by a strange yearning for adventure that had been gnawing at me all week. The fading light of day cast long shadows over the rural road ahead, and the trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying restlessly in the autumn breeze. I found myself on a deserted stretch of road that I had never seen before, the kind of place that whispered secrets from the past. I was heading toward an old, abandoned house that stood isolated on the edge of the woods. Stories about that place had floated around town like restless ghosts, tales of disappearance, strange noises at night, and ethereal lights flickering from the windows when no living soul dared to venture near it. Intrigued and maybe a little too curious for my own good, I parked my car a safe distance away and began the hike down a leaf-strewn path that led to the house. Each step brought with it a mix of excitement and dread, the air thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. As I neared the house, memories of the town's warnings filtered through my mind, yet I couldn't turn back now. I was absorbed by the atmosphere. The house's dilapidated structure loomed like a giant sentinel, its paint peeling and its windows dark and vacant. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached, an almost palpable sense of something waiting, watching. My heart raced with a mix of fear and curiosity as I pushed open the creaking door, which groaned in protest as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Inside, the air was thick and stale. A heavy fog of dust hung in the beams of waning light, and the floorboards protested under my weight. I turned on my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, revealing forgotten furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts of a bygone era. The living room was filled with remnants of lives once lived, a shattered mirror, a rusty lamp, and an old piano whose keys played only silence. But it was what I heard next that made my blood run cold, a faint whisper, almost like a breath, drifting through the air. It felt like it was coming from upstairs. Against every rational thought screaming at me to leave, I felt an irresistible compulsion to investigate. I climbed the staircase, each step creaking louder than the last, unsure if I was more afraid of what lay above or what lurked behind me in the shadows. At the top, the hallway stretched out, and the whispers grew more distinct and haunting, like a song only half remembered, sorrowful, yet oddly inviting. I reached the end of the hallway, where a lone door stood slightly ajar. The doorknob was icy to the touch, a creeping unease settling into my bones as I pushed it open. The room inside was small and dark, furnished only with a dusty, rotting bed and an old wooden trunk in the corner. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, growing louder, more insistent, yet I couldn't make out their words. Hesitating, I approached the trunk, a sense of foreboding warning me to turn away, to leave this place and never return. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, compelled me to open it. The lid creaked open reluctantly, revealing a collection of photographs, their edges yellowed and frayed. I sifted through them, my fingers trembling as I unearthed images of smiling families, children playing, a man and a woman in love, all fleeting moments frozen in time. But as I continued to look, the faces began to change, twisting into grimaces of terror. My heart raced as I realized that in every photograph, in every smiling face, there was always a shadow lurking just beyond, a dark figure that had watched, waited, and now seemed to call out to me. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from downstairs. Panic surged through me. Adrenaline kicked in as I slammed the trunk shut and dashed for the door, my instincts taking over. I descended the stairs two at a time, heart pounding in my chest, a primal urge to escape driving me. But just as I reached the doorway, I paused. The whispers had returned, louder than before, resonating through the walls like a symphony of despair. They begged me to listen, to stay just a little longer. I was torn between the primal urge to flee and the unsettling pull of whatever haunted this place. In an impulse I couldn't control, I turned back, but the door slammed shut behind me, leaving me enveloped in darkness. I was no longer alone. The whispers now transformed into a cacophony of cries, echoing in my mind, drowning out all thoughts of escape. The shadows danced around me, and I felt cold fingers brush against my skin, sending jolts of terror rippling through my body. I fought against the encroaching gloom, searching for a way out, but it felt endless, as if the house itself had come alive and trapped me within its veins. Just as despair began to suffocate me, I remembered the window downstairs. I sprinted towards it, desperate to escape the clutches of the house. I crashed through the door, propelled by sheer terror, and barreled through to the living room, finding the window and shattering the glass with my bare hands. I tumbled out onto the ground, feeling the sharpness of the glass against my skin, but pain was an afterthought. My only desire was to escape the horrors lurking behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, breathless and bruised, heart racing. I jumped in and slammed the door, locking it as if that would somehow seal away the darkness that had pursued me. As I sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror, I was met with a sight that will forever haunt me: the silhouette of the house against the night sky, its windows gleaming as if lit from within, countless shadows moving behind the glass. The whispers faded into the night, but one sentence reverberated through my mind like a death knell: you were chosen. Even now, back in the safety of my home, the memory lingers, a chilling echo that reminds me that some doors should never be opened, that some houses hold secrets best left buried, and that curiosity can sometimes lead you to places from which there is no return. I've always believed that true horror comes from the places we least expect it, from the corners of our minds rather than from monsters lurking in dark alleyways. My life was ordinary and uneventful, filled with mundane responsibilities and familiar routines, until that fateful autumn day when everything changed. It was a chilly October morning when I decided to take a walk around my neighborhood. The air was crisp, the leaves crunched beneath my feet, and the sun cast a warm glow over the landscape, making the world seem almost magical. I never would have guessed that it would be the last time I'd feel that kind of peace. As I wandered the familiar streets, I noticed a dilapidated house I had never seen before, hidden behind overgrown hedges and tangled vines. Its windows were boarded up, and the door hung precariously on its hinges, creaking ominously in the wind, as if inviting me in. Curiosity piqued, I approached the house and pushed the door open, forcing it to reveal a darkened interior. The air inside was musty, thick with dust and the remnants of years gone by. A chilling breeze swept through the hallway, sending shivers down my spine, but an inexplicable urge to explore compelled me forward. Shadowed corners and faded wallpaper spoke of a forgotten history. As I stepped further inside, I felt an uncomfortable sensation creeping over me, as if unseen eyes were watching from the darkness. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing what felt like ancient whispers. I shone my phone's flashlight into the gloom, illuminating cobwebs that danced in the light like the spirits of the long departed. It took only a few moments for the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I dismissed the unsettling feeling at first, convincing myself my imagination was merely running wild. But as I ventured deeper, the eerie atmosphere became suffocating and a chill settled in my bones. I found myself in a room that looked like it had been untouched for decades. Dust-coated furniture stood sentinel against the wall, and in the corner was an old rocking chair that swayed gently, as if someone had just left it moments before. The chill in the air intensified, and dread crept into my heart. Then I noticed it. The wall plastered with faded photographs, black and white images of families, couples, and children, all bearing expressions of happiness that felt haunting in the oppressive silence of the house. I studied one photo in particular, a woman with dark hair and piercing eyes gazing directly into the camera, her smile frozen in time. Somehow, she seemed to look right through me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I backed away, but it was too late. A shadow flitted across the room's edge, and I spun around just in time to see a figure moving discreetly, almost imperceptibly, in the flickering light of my phone. Panic surged through me, but I was rooted in place, my limbs heavy with fear. "Hello," I managed to call out, though my voice shook. No response came, only an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow my words whole. I knew I should leave, but curiosity battled with terror as I took a hesitant step toward the shape that had vanished into the shadows. My breath quickened, drowning out the sound of the breeze outside. Suddenly, a faint whisper pierced the quiet, a voice barely audible yet unmistakable, calling my name. My heart raced, and realization dawned. A memory, a sound from my childhood, a time long forgotten. That voice had haunted me in my dreams for years, a voice that belonged to someone who vanished without a trace when I was just a child. My stomach twisted, and I forced myself to move, back toward the exit, panic rising in my chest. As I turned, I stumbled and fell, dropping my phone. The light flickered as it hit the ground, threatening to plunge me into darkness. I scrambled to retrieve it, and in that fleeting moment, I caught sight of something horrifying in the corner of my eye. A figure, the same woman from the photograph, but this time alive, as if she had emerged from the depths of the house itself. Her face contorted in anguish, a grotesque mimicry of the smile that had once graced the photograph. I could feel her presence crawl beneath my skin, the bone-chilling sensation wrapping around my throat. Despair closed in on me, and I hurled myself toward the door, adrenaline propelling me forward. I ripped the door open and stumbled into the daylight, gasping for breath, my heart racing like a caged animal. The air outside felt like a balm against my skin, but it was tainted with the unmistakable sense of being followed. I ran, fueled by primal fear, not stopping until I reached the safety of my own home. I locked the door behind me and collapsed against it, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The sensation of the woman's eyes lingered in my mind, the chill of her smile still etched into my memory. Days turned into weeks, and though I tried to erase the experience from my mind, I found the memory of that house echoing in my thoughts. The photographs haunted me, each detail crystallizing in my brain, and soon I noticed strange occurrences around my home. Objects moving, eerie shadows creeping along the walls, and, most disturbingly, a familiar whisper calling my name at night. I now knew it wasn't just guilt or paranoia that plagued me. Something had followed me from that house, something dark and hungry. I decided to return, hoping to confront whatever I had unleashed upon myself. My heart raced with dread as I approached the house again. Standing in front of it, I felt the weight of its history bearing down on me. The door still hung open, as if welcoming me back into the shadows. I stepped inside, a mix of fear and determination washing over me. The old rocking chair waited in the corner, still swaying gently. I could hear the whispers again, louder now. They seemed to swirl around me, drawing me deeper into the darkness. Resolute, I followed the sound, leading me to a room I hadn't seen before. It was smaller, more confined, the air thick with tension. I scanned the walls, looking for clues, something to explain the manifestations that had become my reality. And then I saw it, a mirror, cracked and dusty, reflecting not just my image but something darker lurking just behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. My heart pounded as I faced the mirror again, and the whispers coalesced into words, repeating my name with a mournful tone. Suddenly, the woman appeared in the glass, and with a heart-stopping clarity, I realized she was trapped, imprisoned in this house, bound by a sorrow that transcended life itself. I reached for the mirror, hands trembling, feeling a cold rush of air as it drew near. In that moment, I understood she wasn't here to hurt me, but to communicate, to reveal a tragic story that extended beyond my comprehension. As I placed my hand against the fractured surface, images flooded my mind. Her life, a family torn apart, betrayal, pain, and an unavoidable descent into darkness. I gasped as the weight of her sorrow enveloped me, and I felt a surge of empathy for the tragedy that had unfolded within these walls. But just as swiftly, that connection morphed into something sinister. Cold fingers gripped my heart, threatening to pull me into the darkness that consumed her. I recoiled, breaking the contact, and stumbled back as the mirror shattered, slivers of glass raining down around me. In a flash, I turned to flee, adrenaline and fear propelling me toward the exit. As I burst through the door, I felt the shadows clawing at my heels, desperate to hold on to me. I raced down the street, adrenaline thrumming through my veins, unable to look back. It wasn't until I collapsed into the safety of my home that I felt the weight of the darkness lift, but even then, I could sense it lingering just outside my door, waiting. The encounters didn't end there. Days turned into a distorted blur. I found myself unable to sleep, unable to escape the shadows that plagued my every thought. I began to research the history of the house, learning of a family that once lived there, a mother who had mysteriously vanished, her heartbroken husband, and children left to wonder what had happened. Each night, the whispers grew louder, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and longing that drowned out my own thoughts. I felt as if I was no longer in control of my own life. I was merely a vessel for something far more sinister. Desperate and terrified, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in the lore of the area, sharing my experiences and the history of the house. She listened intently, her face growing pale as I recounted the events. "You've opened a connection," she warned. "Spirits trapped in this world often seek resolution. If they can't find peace, they may tether themselves to those who resonate with their pain." The weight of her words settled over me, sinking deep into my bones. I needed to confront the darkness that had entwined itself around my life. The historian guided me through a ritual meant to confront the spirit and grant it freedom. With a heavy heart, I returned to the house once more, armed with candles and quiet determination. The air inside was thick with tension as I set up the ritual, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. I called out to her, the woman from the photographs, asking for her name, her story. The whispers hushed, and for the first time, there was silence. The air crackled with energy as I continued, feeling a shift in the atmosphere, the shadows beginning to swirl around me, drawing closer. It was then that she materialized, not as a terrifying figure, but as a woman burdened by pain. Her eyes were hollow but filled with longing, and I reached out, urging her to speak. The floodgates of emotion opened as she revealed the heart-wrenching tale of betrayal and loss. I listened, heart breaking for the tragedy she endured. As I sit down to share this story, I want to preface it by saying I never believed in the supernatural. I was always the level-headed friend, the one who laughed off the ghost stories recounted around campfires. But something happened to me that shattered my skepticism, and now I swear to you, by all that's sacred, the shadows have a language. All their OWN.IT began 2 years ago when I moved into an old, dilapidated apartment in a historic building. The rent was remarkably cheap, and in my college town, that was a rare find. The walls were cloaked with peeling wallpaper that whispered of times gone by, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot like the whispered secrets of the past. Still, I loved the ambience, the weather charm, and the stories embedded in the very fabrics of the place. I was warned about the history of the building, about strange occurrences and unsolved mysteries, but I brushed them off. I was a man of reason, of logic, and none of it concerned me. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I unpacked my books, set up my computer, and settled into a rhythm of classes, the hum of student life providing a comforting backdrop. Yet, as my routine solidified, strange things began to unfold. At night, the air felt heavier, laden with a tension I couldn't quite place. The shadows deepened, flickering at the edges of my vision, always out of reach when I turned to look directly at them. I laughed at my imagination, convincing myself it was merely the result of too many late nights spent reading horror novels. But then the noises started. At midnight, the thin walls became conduits for unsettling sounds, shuffling, dragging footsteps echoing through the hallways. I told myself it was the neighbors, perhaps another group of students partying too late. But when the noises persisted night after night, an invisible chill gripped my spine. I remembered the stories. A young woman had reportedly died in my apartment under mysterious circumstances decades ago. Ghoulish tales of heartbreak and despair that sounded far too poetic to be real. But logic kept me anchored. Surely it was just the creaking of old bones, the building settling into itself. Then one evening, as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard it, a soft whispering, like a gentle breeze carrying distant voices. It was unintelligible, almost melodic, but laced with a haunting sorrow. My heart raced, feeling inexplicably both drawn to and terrified of the source. I strained to listen, but the moment I sat up, the sound vanished, leaving only the persistent ticking of the clock on the wall. I forced myself to breathe deeply, convincing myself I was simply tired. Days turned into weeks, and those whispers became companions, never revealing their meanings, but always wrapping me in an atmosphere of unease. My friends began to notice something was off. I was becoming more withdrawn, spending late nights in my room, comforted only by the company of flickering candles in the dim light of my laptop. They urged me to come out. It all began on a cold, rainy evening in November when I decided to take a much-needed trip to the small town of Eldridge, a remote place where I had spent summers as a child. I fondly remembered the old farmhouse my grandparents owned, sitting on the edge of a vast cornfield, surrounded by dark woods that whispered with secrets. My grandparents had passed away years ago, leaving the house empty, but when I received a call from a distant relative offering me the keys to the property, I felt a pull to return, to relive those nostalgic memories and find some solace in solitude. I arrived as dusk fell, the sky tinged with the deep hues of twilight, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As I unlocked the creaky front door, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Dust motes danced in the light of my flashlight as I stepped into the living room, which felt frozen in time, with faded photographs lining the walls and the furniture shrouded in sheets. I pulled back the coverings, revealing the remnants of a life long gone. A musty old armchair, a cracked mirror, and a grandfather clock that had long since stopped ticking. The house creaked as it settled, and I couldn't help but feel as though I were not alone. Chalking it up to the eerie silence of the house, I pushed the thought aside and settled in for the night, determined to make the most of my stay. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as I prepared a simple meal. As I sat at the small kitchen table, I glanced at the family portraits hanging crookedly on the wall, the faces of my ancestors peering down at me, their eyes seeming to follow my every movement. There was one portrait of a young girl in a white dress that always unnerved me as a child. She had dark, sorrowful eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. I could swear she had moved when I was a child, but it was likely just my imagination. That night, sleep eluded me. The wind outside moaned like a lost soul, and strange noises echoed throughout the house. It was a chorus of creaks and thuds, as if someone, or something, was moving around in the dark, but I dismissed it as the house settling once again. I finally drifted into a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams of shadowy figures and echoes of laughter that echoed eerily throughout the night. As morning broke, I awoke feeling disoriented and anxious. I decided to explore the property, hoping to shake off the lingering sense of dread. I wandered through the fields, the tall corn swaying gently in the breeze. Yet, something felt off. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a thick tension that weighed down on my chest. I decided to hike into the woods behind the house, where I used to play as a child. The trees stood taller than I remembered, their branches twisted and gnarled, blocking out the sun and casting eerie shadows on the ground. I felt like an intruder in a world that had long forgotten me. As I ventured deeper, I stumbled upon an old, weathered well, half hidden by overgrown vines and moss. Curious, I leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness below. As I stared, I felt an almost magnetic pull, as though something from the depths was calling to me. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, distinct yet unintelligible, drifting through the trees, causing the hairs on my neck to stand up. I straightened up quickly, backing away from the well, my heart racing. I felt the air grow colder, and an unshakable sensation of being watched crept over me. It was time to return to the house. Back inside, I decided to rummage through some of the old belongings, hoping to find something that might connect me to my past. As I opened a dusty trunk in the attic, I uncovered an assortment of letters, photographs, and odd trinkets. Among them was a journal, the pages yellowed with age, belonging to my grandmother. I could feel the weight of its history, the ink faded but still discernible. As I read her words, I became enraptured by her recounting of odd occurrences in the house. Strange noises, the feeling of being watched, and dreams of the girl from the portrait. But there was more. She documented an unsettling encounter one dark night. A figure in white standing at the foot of her bed. My heart raced as I read on, each line heightening my anxiety. The girl in the portrait, it turned out, was my grandmother's sister, Emma, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances decades ago, never to be found. I remembered the hushed conversations about Emma, shrouded in secrecy, the unanswered questions, and the lingering sorrow in my family's history. I glanced at the portrait on the wall. The girl's eyes seemed to glimmer with life. That night, filled with unease, I locked the doors, convinced I needed to feel safe. But as darkness enveloped the house, the familiar sounds returned, echoing through the halls, the creaking floorboards and soft whispers that seemed to call my name. I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, barely able to breathe as I felt the air grow heavy, suffocating. Suddenly, the sound of laughter echoed, ringing through the corridors. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared into the shadows that enveloped the room. The laughter morphed into a chilling giggle, followed by a soft, pleading voice. "Help me." I stumbled out of bed, adrenaline surging through me, and crept toward the staircase. The voice grew louder, drawing me down the hall, pulling me closer to the source. Swallowing my fear, I descended the stairs, guided by the insistent sound, which led me to the living room where the portrait hung. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls as I approached the image of Emma. The air turned ice cold, and I shivered as the whispers turned frantic, desperate. They urged me to find her, to help her. The voice seemed to emanate from the walls, surrounding me as I felt the presence close in, filling the room with an ominous energy. Driven by a compulsion I couldn't understand, I ran back to the attic, searching through the trunk for more clues. I found a small locket I had overlooked, and within it was a tiny picture, a reflection of the little girl in the portrait. As I examined it, a single tear slid down my cheek, and suddenly, the whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar, urging me to release her. I stumbled backward, terrified. The shadows in the corners of my vision began to shift, coalescing into a figure, a child in a white dress resembling the girl from the portrait, her eyes filled with sadness, reaching out to me. Frozen in place, I gazed into her dark eyes, and in an instant, I understood her pain, the weight of her lost and forgotten existence. I felt drawn to her, tears streaming down my face as I murmured the word sorry. The temperature dropped even further, and she whispered, "Find me." Instinctively, I turned and raced toward the well, propelled by a force I could not resist. As I reached it, the wind picked up, howling like a banshee, and I could hear her voice, pleading, resonating deep within my soul. I knelt at the edge of the well, heart pounding, and with trembling hands, I peered over the edge. It was dark, almost bottomless, but I felt an overwhelming need to reach for her, to pull her back into the world where she belonged. I called out her name, but there was no response, only an echo that bounced back at me, taunting. Desperate, I lowered a flashlight into the darkness, the beam cutting through the blackness, revealing only cold stone. I felt a sense of loss wash over me. She was trapped, unable to escape. Suddenly, the wind howled louder, an angry cry that rattled my bones. I pulled the flashlight back, and as I did, I caught sight of something glimmering at the bottom. My breath hitched in my throat. Was it a reflection? I felt the ground shake beneath me, and I realized it wasn't just the wind. Something was awakening. I fought to pull myself back, but the earth trembled beneath me, and with a final desperate cry, I called out for Emma. In that moment, the figure appeared again, closer this time, her shadow swirling with the chaos. "Help me," she whispered, and as I reached toward her, a chilling wind swept around me, knocking me off balance and sending me tumbling to the ground. Dazed and disoriented, I glanced up to find the figure gone, swallowed back into the shadows. The wind ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake, and I realized that Emma's essence had vanished with it. I sat there, shaken, contemplating my next move. The air felt heavy with a sense of unfinished business. I knew I couldn't leave like this. I gathered my courage and climbed to my feet, filled with determination. I would uncover the truth of Emma's fate, and I would not rest until I had given her the peace she deserved. That night, I pored over the letters and the journal, piecing together fragments of my grandmother's memories, determined to solve the mystery. I discovered hints of a family secret, rumors of a forbidden place deep in the woods where strange things occurred, and a persistent unease about the well that had always been in the backyard. It was suggested that Emma had gone searching for something hidden within those woods before she vanished. After a restless night filled with dreams of shadowy figures and haunting laughter, morning light pierced through the windows, and I hiked back into the woods where I had found the well. My heart raced as I followed the familiar path deeper into the trees, guided by the pulsing energy of the lost girl. Eventually, I reached a clearing that felt different, a palpable tension in the air. In the center stood an old, weathered tree, gnarled and twisted as if it had absorbed the pain of years. I approached it cautiously, feeling drawn to its presence. As I reached out to touch the rough bark, a surge of energy coursed through me. Suddenly, a rustling noise echoed through the clearing, and I froze in place. I'll never forget the summer I turned 17. It marked the beginning of an unshakable fear that would haunt me for years. I had grown up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are often whispered behind closed doors. My family lived on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly into twilight. It was an ordinary evening in July when I finally decided to explore the forest that had always loomed mysterious and entrancing before me. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of adventure, I ventured into the thicket, driven by a desire to uncover what lay hidden within. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows among the trees. I felt an unusual thrill as the familiar sounds of crickets and rustling leaves enveloped me, though a faint chill threaded through the air that I couldn't quite ignore. The deeper I wandered, the more the forest felt alive, its presence wrapping around me like a shroud, heavy and oppressive. Just as I began to dismiss my unease, I stumbled upon a clearing that opened up suddenly, as if the trees had conspired to hide it. At its center lay an old, decrepit cabin, its weathered boards sagging and paint peeling, adding a peculiar charm if it wasn't for the ominous aura it exuded. I felt an irrational pull to investigate, despite the instinct within me urging caution. As I stepped closer, the air turned cold, almost biting. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears as I approached the cabin, its door slightly ajar, as though inviting me in. With a deep breath, I turned the rusted handle and pushed the door open, its creak echoing through the stillness like a warning bell. Inside, the darkness swallowed me, the beam from my flashlight revealing dust-covered furniture shrouded in ghostly cobwebs. I could smell mold and decay, a stale stench that felt like it had settled into the very bones of the building. As I explored the small, cluttered rooms, unease twisted tightly in my gut, further fueled by a feeling of being watched. I tried to shake off the sensation, diverting my thoughts to why I was there, to uncovering the history of this long-abandoned place. My attention was drawn to the wall where torn photographs hung askew, faded faces looking down at me as if judging my presence. They were all too recognizable, faces of residents from my town, each one with a story that echoed through whispered conversations. I wondered why these images were here, what connection this cabin had to those people. As I turned to leave, the floor creaked ominously beneath me, the sound amplifying the dread pooling in my stomach. It was then that I noticed something glinting on the floor. Curiosity piqued, I bent down, lifting a rusted key with intricate designs. For a moment, a wave of excitement washed over me as possibilities flickered in my mind, but that thrill was quickly replaced by a deepening sense of foreboding. In my naivety, I thought I could unlock secrets long forgotten, but something about that key felt wrong, like holding onto a piece of despair. I slipped it into my pocket and turned to leave, but as I did, a sudden chill rushed through the room, and the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged within me. I pushed against the door, but it refused to budge. Frantically, I turned back to the cabin's interior, hoping to find another exit. The air felt electric, dense with a palpable energy, as whispers began to fill the silence around me. They echoed off the walls, unintelligible at first, but slowly forming words, broken sentences pleading for help, for release. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voices intensified, a chorus of torment that suffocated my thoughts. With a surge of adrenaline, I decided to search for a window, anything to escape the cacophony of despair that engulfed me. I raced through the murky rooms, dodging furniture, every step sending waves of dread through my mind. Just as I found a narrow window, I heard a soft patter, a slow, deliberate tapping behind me. I froze, feeling icy fingers trace up my spine. I knew I wasn't alone. The tapping grew louder, seemingly gaining momentum, and I swung around to face the darkness. The air thickened, and out of the shadows stepped a figure shrouded in black, its features indistinguishable. I stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The figure raised its hand towards me, and I felt an overwhelming pull, a sense of despair that eclipsed my very essence. Staring into the void where its face should have been, I felt memories flood my mind, fragments of lives once lived, stories untold. Something terrible and profound swept through me, revealing the truth of the souls that had lingered in that place. They were trapped, bound by their pasts and the sins of this cabin. Just as I felt I might sink into that abyss, I remembered the key in my pocket. With a fleeting hope, I yanked it out and clutched it tightly, believing it could be my salvation. As if sensing my intention, the figure halted, the tapping ceased, and time stood still. In that moment, I felt a surge of energy, colors swirling around me as the whispers softened, morphing from cries into something resembling a plea. I took a step forward, lifting the key and calling out to the entity. "You don't have to be trapped. We can find a way," I shouted, feeling a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. But the figure merely stood still, as if processing my words, before it began to dissolve into the shadows, its sorrow resonating in the space around me. Heart racing, I rushed back to the door, hammering against it with all my might. The moment I touched the handle again, it gave way, swinging open and spilling me into the night. I ran, stumbling over roots and branches until the cabin vanished behind me, swallowed by darkness. When I finally burst through the trees, gasping for breath, I vowed never to return, unable to shake the nagging feeling that those souls were still tethered to the place, still lost. The key stayed with me, a reminder of the burden I had embraced and the terror I had witnessed. Eventually, I tucked it away, deeming it a relic of my past, but I knew then that the cabin and its secrets were forever etched in my memory. To this day, I wander the forests with caution, haunted by the awareness that some doors, once opened, can never truly close, and some souls remain bound to their histories, lurking in the shadows. When I was a child, my family lived on the edge of a thick forest, a place where the sun barely penetrated the dense canopy of trees. The locals would often warn us to stay away from the woods, telling tales of spirits and creatures that roamed within. We brushed off their warnings, chalking them up to superstition, a means to keep children from wandering too far. My friends and I often ventured into the forest, eager to explore the hidden trails and forgotten history. unaware that we were trespassing into a realm that had long been untouched by the outside world. It was during one of those carefree summer afternoons when we stumbled upon an old cabin, half collapsed and overgrown with vines. The cabin had an eerie quality, as if it held its breath, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. Curiosity outweighed caution, and we approached, peering through the cracked windows. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the smell of decay. Broken furniture was scattered about, and the remnants of a fire pit lay in the center, surrounded by charred stones. We felt as if we were intruding on a sacred space, but the thrill of discovery compelled us to enter. As we stepped inside, the floor creaked ominously beneath our weight. The fading light filtered through the grimy windows, casting strange shadows that danced on the walls. We began to explore, poking through the remnants of a life once lived. Old photographs lay strewn about, their faces smudged and unrecognizable, yet their gazes seemed to follow us. It was unsettling, but our imaginations ran wild, crafting stories of who once inhabited this place. Suddenly, a low groan echoed from somewhere deep within the cabin, and we froze, our hearts pounding. It was unlike anything we had ever heard, a mournful sound that seemed to weave through the very air, chilling us to the bone. At first, we tried to convince each other that it was just the wind, but then we heard it again, louder this time. Panic set in, and we darted toward the door, desperate to escape. As we pushed through the entryway, something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the trees, shrouded in shadows. It was too far to make out any details, but I felt its gaze piercing through the dense foliage. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house filled me with dread, and I kept envisioning that figure lurking just beyond the edge of the darkness. I told my friends about it the next day, but they shrugged it off, eager to return to the cabin for more adventure. Against my better judgment, I went with them, trying to shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. When we arrived, the atmosphere felt different. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring our surroundings. We entered the cabin again, and this time we began to notice things we hadn't seen before. Strange markings etched into the walls, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under our gaze. It felt as if the cabin itself was alive, watching us as we intruded upon its domain. That night, as we sat around the fire pit in the center of the cabin, we shared ghost stories, laughing nervously when the shadows around us deepened. But then the laughter died when we heard the groan again, followed by whispers, faint but unmistakable. They were low, raspy sounds that seemed to claw at the edges of our sanity. We huddled closer together, adrenaline coursing through our veins, and decided we could no longer ignore the foreboding presence that enveloped us. We bolted from the cabin, the door slamming behind us as we raced into the cover of trees. The forest was alive with sounds, a cacophony of rustling leaves and snapping branches, as if something were pursuing us. We sprinted through the underbrush, hearts racing, not daring to look back. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest, gasping for breath. In the clearing, we turned to catch our breath, glancing back toward the trees. The cabin loomed. When I was a child, my family lived on the edge of a thick forest, a place where the sun barely penetrated the dense canopy of trees. The locals would often warn us to stay away from the woods, telling tales of spirits and creatures that roamed within. We brushed off their warnings, chalking them up to superstition, a means to keep children from wandering too far. My friends and I often ventured into the forest, eager to explore the hidden trails and forgotten history. Unaware that we were trespassing into a realm that had long been untouched by the outside world. It was during one of those carefree summer afternoons when we stumbled upon an old cabin, half collapsed and overgrown with vines. The cabin had an eerie quality, as if it held its breath, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. Curiosity outweighed caution, and we approached, peering through the cracked windows. Inside, the air was heavy. It was a crisp autumn night when I decided to venture out for a walk. I often found solace in the quiet streets of my small town, where the air was filled with the scent of damp leaves and a faint whisper of impending winter. I had always been drawn to the shadows between the streetlights, where the world felt both eerie and alive. On this particular evening, however, the familiar comfort of my routine transformed into something altogether sinister. As I walked, I noticed that the street was unusually empty. No sounds of laughter or distant music, just the soft crunch of leaves underfoot breaking the oppressive silence. The moon hung high, casting an ethereal glow that painted the world in hues of silver and shadow. Just beyond the park, I saw a figure sitting alone on a bench. The person was draped in a long, dark coat, their face obscured by the brim of a worn hat. I paused, unease creeping up my spine, but curiosity propelled me forward. "Are you okay?" I called out as I approached, noticing how still they sat, as if frozen in time. The figure turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. There was a moment of heavy silence, and then they spoke in a voice that crackled like dry leaves. "Are you afraid of the dark?" My mind raced, caught off guard by such a strange question. I shrugged, forcing a laugh to break the tension. "Not really, just taking a walk." But even as I said it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was off. The way the figure leaned forward, the glint of something sharp momentarily visible in their hand. Fear bubbled up from my gut, urging me to back away. But I didn't. Instead, I felt an inexplicable pull toward them, as if they possessed a secret that was meant only for me. "What about you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What are you doing out here alone?" The figure tilted their head, and a wide smile creased their face, one that didn't reach their eyes. "Sometimes, the darkness shows us truths we would rather not see." It was then that I noticed the strange shadows swirling around them, almost alive, creeping into the space between us. My heart raced, and a primal instinct urged me to flee, but I stood frozen in place, captivated by their words. "Truths?" I echoed, unsure of what I was even asking for. "What truths?" "The truth about you," they replied cryptically, narrowing their gaze. "You always try to hide, don't you?" Panic washed over me. It felt as if the night itself had conspired against me, revealing all my insecurities and fears laid bare. "I don't hide," I protested weakly. I just need time to think." The figure chuckled softly, a sound that chilled me to my core. "Time? Time is a luxury we seldom afford ourselves, isn't it? But it will find you, nonetheless." With that, they stood, their movements fluid and unnatural, like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "Wait," I called, desperation creeping into my voice. "Where are you going?" They paused, looking back at me with intense scrutiny before saying, "I'm here to show you. You need to see." In an instant, they reached into their coat and pulled out what looked like an old, cracked mirror. "Look closely. Your reflection reveals more than you know." Before I could comprehend what was happening, a shimmering light enveloped the mirror, drawing my gaze. It pulsed like a heartbeat, beating against the dark fabric of the night. I stepped forward, compelled to take a closer look, and as I did, the world around me faded, leaving only the mirror's surface glimmering like water under moonlight. I peered into the glass and gasped. My reflection twisted and warped, showing not just my face, but shadows of my past, moments I had buried deep, regrets surfacing like ghosts from an unmarked grave. I saw myself fail, betray, and abandon those I loved, trapped in an unending cycle of remorse. The deeper I looked, the more visceral the images became. I cringed as my heart raced, feeling the weight of every decision I had ever made. "Horror takes many forms, my friend," whispered the figure, their voice echoing in the chaos of my own thoughts. "Will you confront it, or will you continue to run?" I recoiled, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. I can't face that." The darkness tightened around me, suffocating, as memories clawed at my consciousness. "Then you are already lost," they stated simply, and the mirror shattered in a burst of light, scattering the pieces into a storm of reflective shards. I stumbled back, disoriented, heart thundering in my chest. Suddenly, I was alone again, standing in the park, the bench empty, and the figure gone. The shadows danced around me as the weight of realization crashed down. The darkness I had faced wasn't external. It was an echo of my own mind, my choices, my fears. As I hurried home that night, the chill of the autumn air felt different. The shadows no longer whispered fear, but rather a haunting understanding. The figure may have vanished, but their words lingered, a reminder of the truths I had to confront. I realized then that true horror lies not in darkness itself, but in the unacknowledged facets of ourselves we choose to ignore. I was left with a chilling thought. How many more walks would I take before I dared to face the shadows within? As I sit here in the dim light of my living room, my fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard, I can't help but feel an overwhelming urge to share my story. I've kept it hidden for far too long, buried beneath layers of denial and fear. But this is my truth, one that has haunted me relentlessly. It all began 3 years ago in a small coastal town, where I had moved seeking peace and solitude after a tumultuous year filled with personal losses. I rented a quaint little cottage at the edge of the woods, a perfect retreat that, I thought, would allow me to heal. For the first few weeks, I found solace in the gentle sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of seagulls, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. However, as autumn approached, a feeling of unease began to creep in. It started with whispers in the wind, soft at first, barely audible, but I dismissed it, attributing it to my overactive imagination. Yet as the nights grew longer and the shadows deepened, the whispers became something much more sinister. Objects in the cottage would shift without explanation, books moved from their places, a glass knocked over, an unsettling sensation that I was being watched. At first, I shrugged these incidents off as simple coincidences, the product of an old house settling. But the atmosphere thickened, an invisible weight pressing down on me, causing my heart to race. One fateful night, I was awoken by a chilling sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the very walls of the cottage. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The darkness felt alive, pulsating around me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept through the house, armed only with a flashlight and my faltering resolve. As I reached the kitchen, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of something in the corner, an indistinct shadow that darted just outside the beam of my flashlight. I froze, my mind racing with panic. Was it a trick of the light? A figment of my imagination? I blinked, and it was gone. I spent the following days in a state of paranoia, sleep-deprived, and on edge. I confided in no one, fearing that I would be labeled as crazy. I scoured the internet for explanations, desperate for reassurance. Ghosts, demons, ancient curses, I stumbled upon countless theories, each more terrifying than the last. One particular website caught my attention, detailing a history of the land my cottage sat upon. I learned that before the town was built, it was the site of a tragic event, a massacre that left the spirits of the dead restless. Desperation clawed at me, and I decided to investigate further. Armed with a flashlight and shaky resolve, I ventured into the woods, feeling a magnetic pull towards an area that seemed foreboding, a clearing that the locals had warned me about. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky as if trying to escape something beneath the earth. As I sit here in the dim light of my living room, my fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard, I can't help but feel an overwhelming urge to share my story. I've kept it hidden for far too long, buried beneath layers of denial and fear. But this is my truth, one that has haunted me relentlessly. It all began 3 years ago in a small coastal town, where I had moved seeking peace and solitude after a tumultuous year filled with personal losses. I rented a quaint little cottage at the edge of the woods, a perfect retreat that, I thought, would allow me to heal. For the first few weeks, I found solace in the gentle sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of seagulls, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. However, as autumn approached, a feeling of unease began to creep in. It started with whispers in the wind, soft at first, barely audible, but I dismissed it, attributing it to my overactive imagination. Yet as the nights grew longer and the shadows deepened, the whispers became something much more sinister. Objects in the cottage would shift without explanation, books moved from their places, a glass knocked over, an unsettling sensation that I was being watched. At first, I shrugged these incidents off as simple coincidences, the product of an old house settling. But the atmosphere thickened, an invisible weight pressing down on me, causing my heart to race. One fateful night, I was awoken by a chilling sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the very walls of the cottage. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The darkness felt alive, pulsating around me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept through the house, armed only with a flashlight and my faltering resolve. As I reached the kitchen, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of something in the corner, an indistinct shadow that darted just outside the beam of my flashlight. I froze, my mind racing with panic. Was it a trick of the light? A figment of my imagination? I blinked, and it was gone. I spent the following days in a state of paranoia, sleep-deprived, and on edge. I confided in no one, fearing that I would be labeled as crazy. I scoured the internet for explanations, desperate for reassurance. Ghosts, demons, ancient curses, I stumbled upon countless theories, each more terrifying than the last. One particular website caught my attention, detailing a history of the land my cottage sat upon. I learned that before the town was built, it was the site of a tragic event, a massacre that left the spirits of the dead restless. Desperation clawed at me, and I decided to investigate further. Armed with a flashlight and shaky resolve, I ventured into the woods, feeling a magnetic pull towards an area that seemed foreboding, a clearing that the locals had warned me about. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky as if trying to escape something beneath the earth. As I reached the clearing, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, my instincts screaming at me to leave. Yet, I was drawn forward, compelled by something unseen. And then I saw it, a weathered stone marker, half buried in the underbrush. Trepidation filled me as I cleared the debris, uncovering the names of those I had always dismissed the concept of horror as something relegated to movies and books, a fantasy realm far removed from my ordinary life. I lived in a small, quiet town where every face seemed familiar, and the nights were only interrupted by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of an owl. That was until I moved into my childhood home after my mother passed away. It was a cozy, old place with creaky wooden floors and wallpaper that hinted at a time long gone. Despite its charm, there was a veil of sorrow that hung heavy within those walls, but I thought I could breathe new life into it. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked, rearranged furniture, and sipped coffee while enjoying the quaint view of the front porch. My only company was a soft orange cat named Whiskers, who seemed to delight in the rustle of cardboard and the chaos of boxes. Yet, as I settled into my routine, a strange sensation crept over me, a feeling of being watched, lingering just at the edge of my awareness. I dismissed it, attributing it to the lingering grief I felt and the anxiety of moving back to a place steeped in memories. It wasn't until the third night that everything changed. I was drifting into sleep when I heard what sounded like a soft whisper. I jolted awake, the room dimly lit by the moonlight seeping through the curtains. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The whisper came again, indistinct but insistent, like the rustle of leaves. I lay there frozen, a trickle of ice running down my spine, but I rationalized that it was just the wind playing tricks on me. The next day, I brushed off my unease. There was plenty to keep me occupied, cleaning, organizing, deciding what to keep and what to discard. Whiskers remained unfazed, probably sensing my tension but choosing to nap in the patch of sunlight in the living room instead. As dusk fell, the oppressive silence of the house returned. I turned on the TV, desperate for the distraction of laughter and light. But just as I began to settle in, I heard it again, the whisper, this time louder and more distinct. It was coming from upstairs. I felt a cold dread wash over me, but curiosity tugged at me too. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart pounding in my ears as I climbed the stairs one step at a time, the floor creaking beneath my weight. I reached the landing, where the air felt heavy and stale. The whisper seemed to beckon me closer to my old bedroom, a place I thought I had left behind in my childhood memories. I approached the door, and as I touched the knob, I hesitated. The whisper grew louder, swirling around me like a dark fog. It was no longer just a sound. It felt like it was coaxing me inside. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open. The room was just as I remembered, filled with relics of my past, the faded posters on the walls, the rickety desk, and the bed covered with a dust-laden quilt. But something was off. Shadows flickered in the corner of my vision, and the air felt electric, as if charged with an unseen presence. I took a cautious step inside, and that's when I spotted it, a rusted old mirror leaning against the far wall, obscured by dust. It was a relic from my mother's youth, and I hadn't thought to cover it. My reflection appeared dim, but as I leaned closer, I noticed something eerie. The reflection of the room behind me was different, faded and ghostly, as if caught in a time warp. My heart pounded as I caught a glimpse of a figure in the back of the reflection, a shadowy outline that didn't belong. Panicking, I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty, quiet room. Yet, when I looked back at the mirror, the figure remained, its form becoming clearer, a woman in a long, flowing dress, her eyes dark and hollow. I stumbled backward, my breath quickening. Whiskers, sensing my distress, darted into the room and hissed at the mirror as if it were an intruder. I couldn't shake the chilling sensation that this figure was somehow connected to my home. Perhaps it was a piece of my family's history I had yet to uncover. For nights, I battled with the whispers and visions, trying to ignore their calls. I spent restless hours awake, haunted by dreams where the woman in the mirror beckoned me with a finger curled. As days turned into weeks, I finally decided to confront the past head-on. I researched my family history, poring over old photographs and documents. I learned that the house had once belonged to my great-grandmother, a woman whose life had been steeped in mystery and loss. Rumors whispered of tragedy, a love lost to war, and a heart that never healed. Compelled to learn more, I visited the town archives, uncovering scraps of letters that revealed a story of despair and longing. My great-grandmother had spiraled into darkness after her love was taken away, and whispers claimed she roamed the very halls of our home, still yearning. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home determined to illuminate her story and perhaps free her spirit. I set up a small shrine in the corner of the bedroom, placing candles, flowers, and a framed photograph of her, hoping to bring peace. That night, I spoke to the air, giving voice to her memory, telling her it was time to let go and find peace. I poured my heart into those words, sharing my own grief, my own fears, and my own journey. As the candle flickered and cast shadows on the walls, something shifted. The air in the room felt lighter. The whispers transformed into a soft breeze, caressing my skin like a gentle embrace. I watched the mirror, bracing myself for the worst, but instead of terror, I saw her face, softer, freer, and finally at peace. She gave me a small smile, and in that moment, I understood it wasn't fear I had to confront, but rather the shared pain of love and loss that transcended time. I felt an overwhelming warmth wash over me, and with one final glance, the figure faded into the mirror, leaving no trace behind, save for the gentle stillness in the room. From that night on, the whispers ceased. The house felt alive again, filled with the sounds of laughter and memories of love. I could finally breathe, freed from the shadows of the past. Whiskers purred happily by my side, and as the seasons changed, I found comfort in the stories of those who came before me, a connection that turned what was once terror into a testament of resilience and healing. I learned that horror sometimes lurks within our own hearts, but so too does love, and it is in confronting our fears that we can finally come home. I still remember the first night I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. I had been searching for an affordable place to live, and this one seemed perfect, with its big bay windows and intricate woodwork. The realtor assured me that the house had character, but I didn't fully grasp the weight of those words until I experienced the unsettling things that began happening soon after I settled in. First, it was the noises. In the quiet of the night, I would hear sounds that echoed through the halls, scratching at the walls, soft whispers that seemed to glide just beyond the edge of my hearing. I chalked it up to an old house settling, but there was a persistent chill that crept into my bones, gnawing at my attempts to rationalize away my mounting anxiety. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, the house had stood for over a century. Surely, it had its stories to tell. Days passed, and I slowly got used to the creaky floorboards and the unexpected drafts. I began to explore the house more. In the attic, I found an old trunk filled with yellowed letters and photographs. They were the remnants of the previous tenants, fragments of lives lived within these walls. One letter caught my eye. It spoke of despair, of a love lost to tragedy. The final line haunted me. I remain here, as shadows linger, waiting for the night. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the ramblings of someone who had dealt with a broken heart. But the shadows began to take form, curling in the corners of my vision. My sleep became restless. I'd wake up feeling suffocated by an unseen weight pressing down on my chest. I dismiss it as stress from work or the anxiety of adapting to a new environment. But then came the dreams, vivid and terrifying. They were filled with faces, twisted expressions of anguish and sorrow. I could hear their cries, pleading with me to understand their pain. I would wake in a cold sweat, every night more frantic than the last point. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, I decided to have a quiet night in. I curled up on the couch with a book, attempting to distract myself from the previous night's nightmare. But as I turned the pages, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. It sent shivers down my spine. The temperature dropped abruptly. I looked around, my heart racing, catching sight of a shadow darting in my periphery. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks and attempted to refocus on my book. Then the whispering began, low and almost melodic, seeping through the air like smoke. I could feel the hair on the nape of my neck rise. I tried to convince myself I was simply overtired, but the whispers intensified, merging into a frantic cacophony of voices. I dropped my book, the sound breaking the spell, and the whispers ceased instantly, leaving a haunting silence in their wake. What was happening? With every passing moment, I felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. My friends noticed my growing unease when I began canceling plans more frequently. They joked about the old haunted house and encouraged me to investigate its history. I relented, visiting the local library to dig into the town's archives. I unearthed a sordid tale of tragedy that enveloped the house. Decades earlier, a family had lived there, a mother and her 2 children. After a violent argument, the father had stormed out, never to return. It was said that the mother succumbed to despair soon after, her grief consuming her, while the children roamed the halls, forever searching for their lost father. Feeling increasingly disoriented, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. One night, I gathered my courage and lit candles throughout the house, creating a small circle of light in the oppressive darkness. I began to speak aloud, addressing the unseen inhabitants. "I am not here to harm you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "If you are in pain, let me help." For a moment, silence engulfed the house. Then a sudden gust extinguished my candles, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged, and I felt an overwhelming presence rush around me, a swirling mass of sorrow and fear. I stumbled toward the stairs, desperate to escape, but the air thickened, as though the house itself was trying to hold me back. I barely made it to the door, throwing it open with shaking hands and running into the night. The following day, I packed my belongings and decided to leave behind the house that had initially seemed like a dream come true but had turned into a living nightmare. The whispers persisted in my mind, an echoing reminder of the presence I could never quite grasp. I never looked back, but as I drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. An ominous shadow stood in the window, watching, waiting, lingering as the car pulled further away from the home that had ensnared my soul. Years have passed since that night, yet sometimes I still feel a chill in the air or hear a faint whisper urging me to return. I don't know what lies within those walls, but a part of me knows it remains there, ever watchful, ever waiting. And I can only hope it never calls to me again. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, and secrets were a rare commodity, yet I held the darkest of them all. I wasn't always the person I am now, burdened by memories that claw at the edges of my mind, trampling on any semblance of peace I might hope to find. It all started when I moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts, a place steeped in whispers of tragedy and despair. The townsfolk warned me to stay away, telling tales of the family that once lived there, how one fateful night they disappeared without a trace. Their absence had become a ghost of its own, one that loomed over the house, saturating the walls with a lingering dark energy. I was drawn to the house for its charm and the low price, ignoring the unease that seemed to wrap around me the moment I crossed the threshold. Each room resonated with echoes of laughter and anguish, and soon, the air turned thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't long before the odd occurrences began. Shadows flitted from the corner of my eye, whispers curled around me in the dead of night, and the creaking of the floorboards felt like footsteps trailing behind me. I told myself it was my imagination, the remnants of the house's tragic history feeding my fears, but my sleep grew restless. The nights dragged on, each one steeped in dread, until I stumbled upon an old trunk in the attic, covered in dust and filled with relics of a life long gone. Among faded photographs and weathered letters, a diary caught my attention. It belonged to Mary, the family matriarch, who wrote about her love for her husband and children, and later about the unease creeping into their lives. The scribbled words began to shift from mundane to frantic, detailing voices calling her name and shadows that grew darker. One entry sent chills down my spine. They watch us from the corners of our world. I can feel them gathering. The further I read, the more entranced I became, as if the words reached out and curled around my mind, binding me to the past. After several nights of reading, I noticed an unsettling detail. Mary had mentioned her fear of a presence that grew stronger as the children played, that something desired their joy, eager to siphon it from their lives. I dismissed it as nothing but the ramblings of a woman slowly. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, and secrets were a rare commodity, yet I held the darkest of them all. I wasn't always the person I am now, burdened by memories that claw at the edges of my mind, trampling on any semblance of peace I might hope to find. It all started when I moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts, a place steeped in whispers of tragedy and despair. The townsfolk warned me to stay away, telling tales of the family that once lived there, how one fateful night they disappeared without a trace. Their absence had become a ghost of its own, one that loomed over the house, saturating the walls with a lingering dark energy. I was drawn to the house for its charm and the low price, ignoring the unease that seemed to wrap around me the moment I crossed the threshold. Each room resonated with echoes of laughter and anguish, and soon, the air turned thick, almost suffocating. It wasn't long before the odd occurrences began. Shadows flitted from the corner of my eye, whispers curled around me in the dead of night, and the creaking of the floorboards felt like footsteps trailing behind me. I told myself it was my imagination, the remnants of the house's tragic history feeding my fears, but my sleep grew restless. The nights dragged on, each one steeped in dread, until I stumbled upon an old trunk in the attic, covered in dust and filled with relics of a life long gone. Among faded photographs and weathered letters, a diary caught my attention. It belonged to Mary, the family matriarch, who wrote about her love for her husband and children, and later about the unease creeping into their lives. The scribbled words began to shift from mundane to frantic, detailing voices calling her name and shadows that grew darker. One entry sent chills down my spine. They watch us from the corners of our world. I can feel them gathering. The further I read, the more entranced I became, as if the words reached out and curled around my mind, binding me to the past. After several nights of reading, I noticed an unsettling detail. Mary had mentioned her fear of a presence that grew stronger as the children played, that something desired their joy, eager to siphon it from their lives. I dismissed it as nothing but the ramblings of a woman slowly losing her grip on sanity, but I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that the shadows dancing just outside my vision weren't merely a figment of my imagination. Strange things began happening. The air felt different, thicker, charged with an unseen energy. I often heard laughter echoing through the halls, only to find myself alone, surrounded by silence. And then came the night I heard the children's voices, giggling and calling out as if they were playing hide and seek. My heart raced as I followed the sound, drawn down the darkened halls of the house. They led me to the basement door, the very place I had avoided since moving in. The whispers grew louder, enticing me to join their game. But instinctively I hesitated, a primal fear holding me back. But curiosity is a powerful beast. It drags us into the depths of our own nightmares. I opened the door, descending into the damp, cold darkness below. The air grew heavier with each step, and I could hear the laughter more distinctly now, mingled with something that sounded almost like crying. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls. In the murky darkness, I glimpsed figures. A group of children stood before me, their faces pale and eyes hollow, devoid of the joy that their laughter had suggested. Frozen with terror, I watched as they beckoned me closer, their smiles stretching unnaturally wide across their faces, revealing an emptiness that nearly consumed the room. "Play with us," they sang, their voices mingling in a chilling harmony. Panic surged through me, the urge to run overwhelming as the shadows thickened, wrapping around me like a vice. But something compelled me to stay, a dark curiosity, a fleeting thought that maybe, just maybe, I could uncover what had happened to the family that lived here, as if reading my mind. The children faded, leaving me with Mary's diary clutched in my trembling hands. Desperation took hold. I needed to know the end of her story, the fate of her family. In the days that followed, I became consumed by it, losing myself in her words. Then, just as Mary had written, the darkness deepened inside me, tugging at my sanity, feeding on my fears until I no longer knew where my life ended and her story began. The house transformed. It morphed into a living nightmare that thrummed with malevolence. I felt unseen eyes watching my every move, an insatiable hunger lurking just beyond the veil of awareness. I began to experience vivid nightmares, horrors that left me gasping for breath upon waking. I witnessed twisted images of Mary's family, their eyes dull and vacant, reliving the day they vanished, trapped in an unending loop of despair. Desperate for relief, I sought help, but no one dared to enter my home. The townsfolk simply shook their heads, muttering about the cursed house. I was left to battle the darkness alone. Night after night, I searched for answers, but every attempt was thwarted by the oppressive weight of the shadows that haunted me. Whispering, taunting, their laughter echoing in the corners of my mind, until I broke in a fit of... It was a dark night when I found myself in an old, crumbling house that had long been forgotten by time. The air was thick with the musty scent of decaying wood and dust, and the silence was occasionally broken by the distant creak of the house settling. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, fascinated by their history and the stories they held. My friends had warned me about this house. They said it was haunted, filled with dark energy and the spirits of those who had once lived there. But I dismissed their fears, convinced that there was nothing more than old rumors and tales crafted over campfires. As I stepped through the threshold, the door creaked ominously behind me, as if warning me to turn back. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but curiosity pushed me forward. The interior was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing rotting wood beneath, and the furniture was draped in sheets, like ghosts in mourning. I wandered from room to room, each more unsettling than the last, filled with remnants of lives once lived, fragments of furniture, and odd, misplaced objects that seemed to tell the story of a hurried departure. In one room, I discovered a child's toy, a dusty teddy bear with one eye missing. It sent a shiver coursing through me, evoking an unshakable feeling of sorrow, as if I could sense the child who once held it close at night, seeking comfort from the darkness that surrounded them. The longer I spent in the house, the heavier the air felt, and an unrelenting sense of being watched began to creep over me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was only an old building playing tricks on my mind. But as I investigated further, I couldn't help but notice the way shadows seemed to cling to the corners of my vision, darting away when I turned to look. I found myself in what appeared to be a once comfortable living room, the windows boarded up, allowing only slivers of moonlight to penetrate the gloom. An old, rusted chandelier hung from the ceiling, swaying ever so slightly, as if stirred by a breeze that should not have been there. It was in that room that I first heard it, a faint whispering, a sound so soft I thought I might be imagining it. I froze, straining to listen, and when the voices came again, I felt my heart race. They were indistinct, overlapping murmurs, filled with a sense of urgency and despair. As I peered into the darkness, I thought I caught a glimpse of movement, a fleeting shadow that vanished when I blinked. The fear that had skulked behind my bravado now crept closer, settling into my bones. I decided to leave the living room, my instincts screaming at me to get out, to run. But when I turned to retrace my steps, the hallway looked different. Shadows loomed larger, the darkness swallowed the light, and I couldn't tell which way was back. Panic seized me. I called out, hoping to hear my voice echoing back, but only silence responded. The whispers returned, louder, more frantic, and I couldn't discern their source. My throat constricted as icy fingers seemed to wrap around my heart. I stumbled back down the hallway, feeling the walls close in around me, and finally, in a fit of adrenaline-driven terror, I turned and charged through a door. To my horror, I found myself in a small, windowless room, the walls dank and crawled with mold. A single bare bulb hung overhead, flickering intermittently. I stumbled back against the wall, realizing too late that I had entered a trap. The whispers intensified, now a cacophony of voices pleading and crying, filling my mind with dread. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm myself, telling myself this was just a house filled with memories of the past, but the atmosphere felt alive, suffocating me in its grip. Suddenly, I felt a presence beside me, cold and overwhelming. I turned slowly, and for a brief moment, I could make out a figure, a shadowy silhouette with no discernible features, just dark, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me, seeking something deep within. That's when I understood. All those stories I had dismissed as myths contained a kernel of truth. The house was a vessel for the lost and the forgotten, a shrine for souls trapped in their sorrow, unable to move on. My body screamed for escape, but my feet refused to move, rooted in terror. The figure stretched a hand toward me, and in a flash, I was gripped by a vision of the past, a family gathered in that very room, laughter and warmth, followed by chaos and screams, betrayal and loss. I was flooded with emotions that were not my own, the despair of loved ones torn apart by fate, the misery of the child who had once owned that teddy bear, now irrevocably linked to this place. Rousing myself from the vision, I lunged toward the door, flinging it open and racing down the narrow staircase, the voices howling after me. I didn't stop to look back. I could feel the house trying to hold on to me, the pull of the souls trapped within, yet I surged forward, driven by pure instinct. I burst through the front door into the night air, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, leaving the house and its shadows behind. But even now, as I sit safe in my room, the whispers linger in my mind, a haunting reminder of that night. The teddy bear still haunts my dreams, a symbol of the innocence lost within those walls. I can't shake the feeling that the house still watches, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in, to listen to its sorrow and become part of its tragic story. I often wonder about the lives that filled those rooms with laughter and love, how quickly it all turned to darkness. In a way, I became part of their history, a brief encounter with remnants of the past that I cannot forget. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, the warning of souls still trapped in a cycle of despair. Sometimes I think I see shadows lurking in the corners of my home, and I know, deep down, that they might not be done with me yet. The house is still there, waiting, and a part of me fears that one day, curiosity might drive me back to that threshold, where the past and present intertwine in a dance of sorrow that refuses to end. It was a frigid night, the kind where the wind howled like a lost soul, and the moonlight struggled to penetrate the heavy clouds overhead. I found myself huddled in my childhood home. The old creaking structure now felt utterly foreign to me, dark, menacing, and filled with the memories of long-lost laughter that seemed to have been replaced with shadows. I had moved away years ago, but a wave of nostalgia compelled me to return after hearing unsettling rumors about strange occurrences in the area. I decided to spend the night alone, hoping to confront that lingering ghost of my past. I settled into the worn-out couch with a cup of tea, the gentle flicker of the candle casting ominous shadows across the walls, twisting the faint silhouettes into grotesque shapes. Then the power went out. The abrupt darkness was suffocating. The sudden silence emphasized the sound of my heartbeat thrumming in my ears. I rose to grab my phone, hoping the flashlight feature could break the oppressive gloom, but the battery was dead. Panic settled in momentarily, but I steadied myself. It was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. I rummaged through the drawers, searching for candles and matches, a task that seemed trivial but felt like an expedition into an abyss. As I searched, old memories beckoned from the corners of the room, faded photographs, dusty books, and toys strewn about. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming presence, as if the ghosts of my childhood were swirling around me, whispering secrets that danced just out of reach. I finally found a few candles and a box of matches. As I lit them one by one, their flickering flames cast a protective glow, though the shadows continued to taunt me with their shifting forms. The atmosphere thickened, and an apprehensive chill crept into the air. Just then, I heard a faint rustling from the kitchen, the sound slicing through the heavy silence, startling me. I stood frozen, every instinct warning me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. I cautiously stepped into the kitchen, the candlelight barely illuminating the chaos within, cabinets ajar, utensils scattered across the floor, as if a struggle had taken place. My heart raced, and I could feel the dread creeping into my bones. I wanted to believe it was merely the product of an overactive imagination, the remnants of my childhood fears surfacing after years of suppression. But something compelled me to step further into the kitchen, closer to the darkened hallway leading to the basement, a place I had always known to be off-limits. I could hear the soft, persistent thumping now, echoing from the depths below. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. My pulse quickened, caught in a tug-of-war between fear and fascination. I felt drawn to it, as if it were beckoning me, whispering promises of secrets long buried. It's just the house settling, I told myself, but even I knew it was a lie. I moved closer to the stairway, its wooden steps creaking under my weight as my hand grasped the cold railing. I hesitated, terrified of what lay beneath, but there was an undeniable urge to uncover the truth. The instant my foot touched the last step, a sense of dread washed over me. The basement was dark, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and mildew. As I took a step forward, the thumping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I felt a cold draft sweep past, and I shivered, my skin prickling. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing into the void, swallowed by the darkness. No answer. Instead, the faint sound of scratching began, like nails scraping against wood, and it was coming from the far corner of the basement. In that moment, a flash of rationality flickered within me, screaming to turn around, to flee, but my body felt paralyzed by fear and an insatiable curiosity. Against my better judgment, I edged closer, the candle flickering wildly in the chilling breeze. There, in the corner, was an old chest, battered and dusty, its leather straps worn. The scratching grew louder, frantic, and I took a deep breath, determined to confront whatever lay inside. I pulled at the lid, and it creaked open, releasing a stale, musty air. A wave of nausea washed over me as I peered inside. It was a frigid night, the kind where the wind howled like a lost soul, and the moonlight struggled to penetrate the heavy clouds overhead. I found myself huddled in my childhood home. The old creaking structure now felt utterly foreign to me, dark, menacing, and filled with the memories of long-lost laughter that seemed to have been replaced with shadows. I had moved away years ago, but a wave of nostalgia compelled me to return after hearing unsettling rumors about strange occurrences in the area. I decided to spend the night alone, hoping to confront that lingering ghost of my past. I settled into the worn-out couch with a cup of tea, the gentle flicker of the candle casting ominous shadows across the walls, twisting the faint silhouettes into grotesque shapes. Then the power went out. The abrupt darkness was suffocating. The sudden silence emphasized the sound of my heartbeat thrumming in my ears. I rose to grab my phone, hoping the flashlight feature could break the oppressive gloom, but the battery was dead. Panic settled in momentarily, but I steadied myself. It was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. I rummaged through the drawers, searching for candles and matches, a task that seemed trivial but felt like an expedition into an abyss. As I searched, old memories beckoned from the corners of the room, faded photographs, dusty books, and toys strewn about. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming presence, as if the ghosts of my childhood were swirling around me, whispering secrets that danced just out of reach. I finally found a few candles and a box of matches. As I lit them one by one, their flickering flames cast a protective glow, though the shadows continued to taunt me with their shifting forms. The atmosphere thickened, and an apprehensive chill crept into the air. Just then, I heard a faint rustling from the kitchen, the sound slicing through the heavy silence, startling me. I stood frozen, every instinct warning me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. I cautiously stepped into the kitchen, the candlelight barely illuminating the chaos within, cabinets ajar, utensils scattered across the floor, as if a struggle had taken place. My heart raced, and I could feel the dread creeping into my bones. I wanted to believe it was merely the product of an overactive imagination, the remnants of my childhood fears surfacing after years of suppression. But something compelled me to step further into the kitchen, closer to the darkened hallway leading to the basement, a place I had always known to be off-limits. I could hear the soft, persistent thumping now, echoing from the depths below. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. My pulse quickened, caught in a tug-of-war between fear and fascination. I felt drawn to it, as if it were beckoning me, whispering promises of secrets long buried. It's just the house settling, I told myself, but even I knew it was a lie. I moved closer to the stairway, its wooden steps creaking under my weight as my hand grasped the cold railing. I hesitated, terrified of what lay beneath, but there was an undeniable urge to uncover the truth. The instant my foot touched the last step, a sense of dread washed over me. The basement was dark. It was a chilly autumn evening when I decided to take a solitary hike in the woods behind my house, a place I had known since childhood. The fading light barely reached the ground, and the trees loomed like dark sentinels lining my path. The forest had always been a source of comfort for me, a sanctuary where I could retreat from the chaos of life. But that night, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the growing darkness and the whispering wind that danced through the branches above. As I walked deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of nature began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost tangible. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the air grew colder. Despite the chill, I pressed on, wanting to reach my usual resting point at the clearing deeper in the woods. That was when I first noticed the presence. At first, it was merely a flicker in my peripheral vision, a movement I dismissed as my imagination, or perhaps a deer skimming through the underbrush. But as I continued walking, I felt it, an intense, prickling sensation crawling over my skin, as if eyes were boring into my back. I turned around, but nothing was there, just the trees standing like silent guards. Shaking off the feeling, I continued, but the sensation wouldn't dissipate. It grew heavier, clinging to me like a thick fog. I reached the clearing, the moonlight spilling into the open space, illuminating the ground. The soft glow attracted my gaze, momentarily easing my tension. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I'd walked these paths countless times, and settled onto a familiar rock, my usual perch. As I sat there, the unease returned, gnawing at the edge of my mind. I noticed the woods were unnaturally still, devoid of the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and rustling leaves. An unsettling feeling grew when my phone buzzed, an alert from a friend, asking if I was okay, which struck me as bizarre since I hadn't told anyone I was out here. "Of course, I am," I replied, but deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, Suddenly, a rustle to my left grabbed my attention. I turned my head, half expecting to see a deer, but instead, I caught a glimpse of something human-like dart behind a tree. The figure was obscured by shadows, but there was a clarity in my mind, a gut feeling that I wasn't alone. I called out, trying to sound brave, but my voice wavered, a whisper among the thick silence. "Hello." There was no answer, only the soft crackle of leaves underfoot, but they were not mine. The feeling of being watched intensified, and panic began to rise in me like bile. My heart raced, and I felt the urge to run, but I stayed rooted to that rock. Then, from behind the tree, a face emerged, a pale, gaunt figure, eyes hollow and wide, a ghastly grin spreading across its lips. The sight sent a shockwave of terror through me, and like a puppet cut from its strings, I leapt to my feet, stumbling backward. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me with an unsettling stillness. I took a breath, trying to steady myself, but as I backed away, my heel caught on a fallen branch, sending me crashing to the ground. The figure took a step forward, and in that moment, primal instinct kicked in. I scrambled to my feet and ran, branches slapping against my arms and face as I tore through the trails, the echo of my own footsteps pounding rhythmically in the night. The path twisted and turned, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel the presence behind me, an invisible weight trailing just a breath away, just out of sight. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, the trees a blur on either side, until finally, I broke free from the woods and stumbled out into the clearing near my house. I threw the door open, slamming it shut behind me and leaning against it as I fought to catch my breath. The house was filled with the warmth and light I had missed, the normalcy instantly soothing my frayed nerves. But as I looked out through the window, my heart dropped. The shadowy figure was standing at the edge of the woods, as if waiting for me, a dark silhouette against the moonlit forest. I blinked, and it vanished into the darkness. The next day, I told my friends about the incident, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They laughed it off, suggesting I was just spooked from being alone in the dark. I tried to convince myself they were right, but deep down, the memory clung to me like a second skin, haunting my thoughts. I could no longer return to the woods for solace. Every rustle, every whisper of the wind held a terrifying possibility. Days turned into weeks, and I felt increasingly isolated, plagued by nightmares and the ever-present fear that something was waiting just beyond the trees. My friends continued to invite me to join them for hikes, but I always found an excuse to decline. I could hear the faintest scratching sound in the walls of my house at night, like nails dragging against wood, and shadows seemed to stretch and morph into strange shapes when the light faded. It felt like the forest had crept into my life, wrapping around my thoughts and sinking its claws into my very being. Then one evening, just after sunset, the scratching grew louder, reverberating through the silence of my home. Panic surged as I bolted from the couch and grabbed a flashlight. I crept cautiously down the hall, the beam of light flickering as I entered dark rooms. Each step felt like a countdown, and as I reached the front door, I caught sight of the still figure standing where the woods met my yard, its grin more pronounced against the dimming sky. Terror washed over me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table, heart racing with realization. This wasn't just in my mind. It followed me, taunting me as I tried to find sanctuary that I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront it. I pulled open the door, flashlight shaking in my hand, and stepped outside. "What do you want?" I shouted, voice echoing against the stillness. The figure remained motionless, unblinking, and for a moment, I thought I could feel the air shift, heavy with expectation. Then it turned, and with a speed that defied explanation, vanished into the shadows. In that instant, I felt a pang of desperation, not just to escape, but to understand. Days turned into months, and though I never saw the entity again, I remained haunted. I researched everything about the woods, legends, hauntings, unsolved mysteries, but found little solace in what I learned. Some nights, I could still hear whispers in the wind, feel the prickle of eyes upon me, and even now, as I share this story with you, I cannot shake the feeling that the forest still watches, waiting for the moment I might return. There's an unsettling comfort in knowing that no matter how far I run, those woods hold secrets far darker than I could ever comprehend, and perhaps the figure still waits for the next soul drawn into the depth of its shadows. It began one cold, rainy evening when I moved into an old house at the end of a quiet street. The house was decrepit, with peeling paint and a crooked fence, but it was all I could afford at the time. I remember the day I arrived, how the clouds hung low in the sky, casting an eerie shadow over the property. I shrugged off the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over me, convincing myself that it was merely the gloom of the weather affecting my mood. Unpacking my belongings took hours, and as dusk settled in, the house creaked and groaned, whispering secrets of a bygone era. That night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like whispers, faint and distant, almost as if someone was having a conversation just above my head. My heart raced, but I chalked it up to the imagination of someone who had just moved into a new home. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers continued, growing louder and more defined. Sleep became a precious commodity as I found myself lying awake, listening intently to the fragmented conversations. A chilling feeling often accompanied them, like someone was watching me from the shadows. I explored the house, hoping to uncover the source of the voices, only to find dust-covered furniture and empty rooms filled with an unsettling silence. However, the attic door was locked, and no amount of prying seemed to open it. One evening, in a fit of curiosity, I decided to confront the whispers head-on. I pulled a chair over to the attic door, standing on it to reach a small window. As I peered through, my breath hitched in my throat. I could see the faint outline of what appeared to be a figure. It began one cold, rainy evening when I moved into an old house at the end of a quiet street. The house was decrepit, with peeling paint and a crooked fence, but it was all I could afford at the time. I remember the day I arrived, how the clouds hung low in the sky, casting an eerie shadow over the property. I shrugged off the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over me, convincing myself that it was merely the gloom of the weather affecting my mood. Unpacking my belongings took hours, and as dusk settled in, the house creaked and groaned, whispering secrets of a bygone era. That night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like whispers, faint and distant, almost as if someone was having a conversation just above my head. My heart raced, but I chalked it up to the imagination of someone who had just moved into a new home. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers continued, growing louder and more defined. Sleep became a precious commodity as I found myself lying awake, listening intently to the fragmented conversations. A chilling feeling often accompanied them, like someone was watching me from the shadows. I explored the house, hoping to uncover the source of the voices, only to find dust-covered furniture and empty rooms filled with an unsettling silence. However, the attic door was locked, and no amount of prying seemed to open it. One evening, in a fit of curiosity, I decided to confront the whispers head-on. I pulled a chair over to the attic door, standing on it to reach a small window. As I peered through, my breath hitched in my throat. I could see the faint outline of what appeared to be a figure, shrouded in darkness. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, falling off the chair and landing on the hard wooden floor. After that night, I desperately tried to ignore the whispers. I filled my days with distractions, throwing myself into work and avoiding the house as much as possible. But the voices only grew louder, and I could swear they were calling my name. "Help us," they echoed, reverberating in my mind. I grew paranoid, questioning if I was losing my sanity. One stormy night, as thunder crashed and the wind howled outside, I found myself drawn to the attic door again. Something compelled me to confront whatever lay behind it. With shaking hands, I grabbed a flathead screwdriver and pried the door open. The hinges squeaked in protest, and the door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a darkened attic filled with the scent of decay. As my eyes adjusted to the faint light, I was horrified by what I saw. The walls were adorned with newspaper clippings, faded photographs of families who had once lived in the house, their faces distorted, as if someone had scratched at them in anger. In the center stood a decaying chair covered in dust, the whispers now a cacophony of voices, pleading and crying. "Help us! Free us!" They cried out, their desperation palpable. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, but something pulled me closer. In a corner, I spotted a small, ornate box. As I approached, the voices grew louder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside, I found a collection of small trinkets, a locket, a broken watch, and a weathered diary. The diary's pages were yellowed, filled with the frantic. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until that one summer when I was 16 at my grandmother's old house in the countryside. It was an ancient structure, the kind that creaked with age and whispered secrets through the cracks in its walls. My parents sent me to stay there for a month while they traveled for work, proclaiming it a chance to bond with family and escape the city noise. I was apprehensive but excited. This was the house where I had spent countless summers as a child, adorned with memories of laughter, warmth, and innocence. But as time unfolded, those memories became overshadowed by something darker. The first few days were blissful, filled with long walks in the fields, lazy afternoons spent reading under the sprawling oak tree in the garden, and evenings listening to my grandmother's stories of her youth. But the atmosphere in the house shifted as night began to fall, creeping in like a shadow. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans that unsettled me. It was an indescribable chill that enveloped me as I returned to my room after twilight. The whispers began that first night, faint and indistinct, like half-formed thoughts echoing against the walls. I brushed it off, attributing the sounds to old pipes or the house settling, but deep down, I felt a stirring of unease. By the end of the week, the whispers transformed into something more tangible. I began to notice things out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting across doorways, flickers of movement that vanished upon direct gaze. Every morning, I found small objects displaced. My grandmother's old ceramic figurines slightly turned, the family photographs tilted at odd angles. I asked her if she had moved them, but she shook her head, her face pale, eyes flickering with something akin to dread. She told me of the night she felt a presence in the hallway, cold and heavy, as if someone or something was standing just out of sight. Her stories were warnings that I, too, would learn to heed as the days wore on. It wasn't until the full moon rose in the sky that I felt a shift in the house's energy. That night, I lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The air thickened with tension, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Suddenly, I heard the murmurs again, but this time they were clearer, callous whispers that seemed to coil around my thoughts, enticing yet foreboding. I sat up in bed, peering into the darkness. For a moment, everything was still, and then I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping, as if fingers were rapping against the wooden floorboards outside my door. My breath hitched, and I froze, paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. With each tap, a chilling realization washed over me. It wasn't just that I was alone. I was not alone at all. I dared to move, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed, feet touching the cool floor. The tapping stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that felt suffocating. Bracing myself, I opened my door slowly, the hinges squeaking in protest. I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, illuminated only by the silver glow of the moon spilling through the grimy windows. I wandered through the dim corridors, heart racing with every creak beneath my feet. The house felt alive around me, breathing softly. I reached the living room, where the shadows seemed to gather like a clenched fist. It was here I saw it, a figure, partially obscured in darkness, standing at the far end of the room, motionless. My breath caught in my throat, and I was frozen in place. The figure turned ever so slightly, and I felt a jolt of recognition wash over me. It looked like my grandmother, but it had an ethereal quality, pale, almost transparent, with hollow eyes that seemed to penetrate my very soul. Trying to scream, I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. Instead, I found myself taking a step forward, compelled by an invisible force, the shadows twisting around me like tendrils reaching out to pull me into the darkness. The figure beckoned, and as I neared, the chilling whispers crescendoed, revealing secrets of pain and anguish that echoed through time. I saw glimpses of my grandmother's past, lost loves, tragedies, her struggle to remain here after the death of my grandfather. The weight of sorrow hung in the air like fog. Just as I was about to I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until that one summer when I was 16 at my grandmother's old house in the countryside. It was an ancient structure, the kind that creaked with age and whispered secrets through the cracks in its walls. My parents sent me to stay there for a month while they traveled for work, proclaiming it a chance to bond with family and escape the city noise. I was apprehensive but excited. This was the house where I had spent countless summers as a child, adorned with memories of laughter, warmth, and innocence. But as time unfolded, those memories became overshadowed by something darker. The first few days were blissful, filled with long walks in the fields, lazy afternoons spent reading under the sprawling oak tree in the garden, and evenings listening to my grandmother's stories of her youth. But the atmosphere in the house shifted as night began to fall, creeping in like a shadow. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans that unsettled me. It was an indescribable chill that enveloped me as I returned to my room after twilight. The whispers began that first night, faint and indistinct, like half-formed thoughts echoing against the walls. I brushed it off, attributing the sounds to old pipes or the house settling, but deep down, I felt a stirring of unease. By the end of the week, the whispers transformed into something more tangible. I began to notice things out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting across doorways, flickers of movement that vanished upon direct gaze. Every morning, I found small objects displaced. My grandmother's old ceramic figurines slightly turned, the family photographs tilted at odd angles. I asked her if she had moved them, but she shook her head, her face pale, eyes flickering with something akin to dread. She told me of the night she felt a presence in the hallway, cold and heavy, as if someone or something was standing just out of sight. Her stories were warnings that I, too, would learn to heed as the days wore on. It wasn't until the full moon rose and it was a cold, dreary evening when I first noticed the strange occurrences in my home. I lived alone in an old Victorian house that creaked with the weight of its history, but I had always found comfort in its quirks. The flickering lights, the drafty hallways, these were simply the house's way of reminding me it was alive. However, that night, as I settled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, a lack of sleep compounded by the dim light of the setting sun filtering through my window. The wind howled outside, making the branches of the ancient oak tree that loomed over my yard scrape against the house, a sound I had always found oddly soothing. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like a warning. It all began with small things. My keys would occasionally go missing, only to reappear in odd places. I dismissed it as forgetfulness, an all too human flaw. But as days turned into weeks, the unsettling incidents became more pronounced. I started hearing whispers when I was alone, soft murmurs that crept beneath my door. At first, they were indistinguishable, but over time, they began to form words that made my skin crawl. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, noises that echoed from the world outside or perhaps even within my own mind. Yet, the whispers became more persistent, more insistent, and I found it increasingly difficult to ignore them. One night, unable to sleep due to the cacophony of whispers swirling through my head, I decided to confront whatever presence I felt lingering within the walls. I sat in the living room, surrounded by flickering candlelight, and called out into the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" My voice trembled as I spoke, echoing awkwardly in the quiet space. For a moment, there was silence, and just as I began to feel foolish, the temperature in the room plummeted. A chill wrapped around me, seeping into my bones. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself I was dreaming, but it was all too real. Then came the scratching. The sound began faintly, like a distant animal clawing at the door, but slowly it grew louder, more frantic. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, as if the air had thickened around me. I mustered enough courage to peer into the darkness of the hallway, where the sound seemed to be coming from. My heart raced, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dart into the shadows. I called out again, desperation creeping into my tone, but only the scratching responded, now accompanied by low, throaty laughter that echoed in the corners of my mind. Days turned into a blur as the occurrences escalated. The whispers became clearer, sentences punctuated by sinister laughter that danced around my thoughts. I started to lose touch with reality. Friends grew concerned, reaching out to me, but I shut them out. I didn't want to admit that I was losing my grip on sanity, that I was being haunted not just by a specter of the past, but by my own fears. One evening, I found myself standing in front of an old mirror that had belonged to the house's original owner. The glass was clouded and fogged, but as I wiped it clean, I caught a glimpse of something behind me, a figure, pale and indistinct, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. Panic surged through me, and I turned to face it, but of course, it was gone, leaving only the lingering impression that I was not alone. I retreated to my bedroom, frantically trying to convince myself it was all in my head, but sleep eluded me. The whispers spiraled into screams in the dark corners of my mind, a cacophony that demanded my attention. I could no longer distinguish between dreams and waking nightmares. In those moments, I felt something brushing against my skin, icy, like the breath of a ghost. It whispered secrets I was not meant to hear, but there was a promise in those words that seduced me into believing I could solve the mystery of my haunting. In my desperation, I began researching the house's history. I found reports of its original owner, a woman shunned by society due to her supposed dealings with dark forces. The stories were filled with superstition and fear, but they echoed my own experience in a way that sent shivers down my spine. It was said that she had cursed the house, that anyone who dared to trespass upon her domain would become ensnared in her spectral grip. I started piecing together the puzzle of her life, searching for something, anything, that could free me from this torment. After weeks of gathering information, I thought I had found a way to break the curse. The final night approached, ripe with dread and anticipation. I set up an altar in the living room, arranging candles in a circle while reciting incantations I had unearthed in dusty tomes. As I spoke the final words, an overpowering silence descended. The air felt charged, electric, and I braced myself, waiting for something to happen. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, but then abruptly fell silent. I could feel the house holding its breath, waiting, and then she appeared, the specter of the woman who had once inhabited my home. Her presence was overwhelming, an amalgamation of sorrow and rage. She was beautiful in the way that horrors often are, with a face that seemed to flicker in and out of focus, but her eyes burned with an intensity that paralyzed me. She reached out, her hand hovering just before my chest, and in that moment, I understood her pain. She had been wronged, trapped in her own creation, and I, in my own isolation, had unwittingly become a conduit for her anguish. In a split second, I made a choice. I stepped forward, enveloping myself in the icy void between us. It was a decision born out of empathy. I spoke to her not as a ghost, but as a lost soul. And in turn, she whispered secrets, a tale of sorrow and betrayal that wrapped around my heart. The room vibrated with her energy, and something shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, breaking like dawn after a long, dark night. As the light returned, I felt her presence fade, and with it, the whispers that had haunted me for so long. My house, once a prison, became a sanctuary again, filled with warmth and laughter rather than fear. The nights grew peaceful, and the shadows retreated to their corners. I learned that sometimes, the true horror lies not in the supernatural, but in the acknowledgement of our shared human experience, the emotions that bind us across time and space. I know now that she is at peace, and so, perhaps, am I. As dusk settled over the small town of Maplewood, a dense fog rolled in from the nearby woods, wrapping the streets in a chilling embrace. It was the kind of place where secrets lingered like shadows, and every creak of the old houses seemed to whisper confessions of things best left unsaid. I had recently moved there, hoping to escape the chaos of my previous life, a place filled with familiar faces but unfamiliar feelings. I thought a change of scenery would do me good, but it didn't take long before the town revealed its sinister undercurrents. I quickly became aware of the town's unsettling atmosphere. People eyed me with curiosity but no warmth. It started with the whispers, low and cautious, when I passed by the local diner or the small grocery store. I could catch snippets about the woods and the missing. The locals seemed to skate over the topics, and when I asked my landlord about them, he simply shrugged and said, "Just don't go out there at night." Curiosity gnawed at me, fueled by the way the locals shunned any conversation about the woods surrounding the town. One evening, determined to confront the town's mysteries, I decided to stroll through the edges of the forest that encroached upon Maplewood. As I stepped into the trees, an eerie silence enveloped me. The usual night sounds faded away, leaving only the rustling of the leaves above. I followed a narrow path illuminated by my flashlight, the beam shaking slightly as I exhaled apprehensively. It felt as though the woods were holding their breath, watching my every move. Just as I began to turn back, I stumbled upon an old, decaying cabin hidden behind thick underbrush, its windows shattered and door ajar. Despite the creeping sense of dread, I felt an overwhelming urge to explore. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my weight as I moved cautiously from room to room. In what appeared to be a living area, scattered remnants of photos caught my eye. They lay strewn across the floor, their faces torn and faded, families that had lived here, smiling in happier times. My stomach twisted as I noticed an unease in their eyes, hinting at some shared darkness. I continued deeper into the cabin and found a dusty journal on a rickety table. The pages were yellowed and brittle. Flipping through, I discovered entries dated decades ago, chronicling a family's descent into paranoia. The last entry sent shivers down my spine. It spoke of voices in the woods, of being watched, and then a single, desperate plea: "They're coming for me." I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing as I felt an overwhelming presence behind me. Spinning around, I found myself face to face with a figure, a gaunt, shadowy woman, her eyes hollow and unyielding. She stood at the door, her long, tangled hair framing a face that twisted in anguish. A guttural whisper slipped from her lips, "Get out." Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over debris as I fled the cabin. The chill of the night air gnawed at my skin while branches clawed at my arms as I burst back onto the path. Breathless, I sprinted back to the safety of my home, the shadowy woman's warning echoing in my mind. Days passed, and I tried to shake off the experience. I kept my curtains drawn, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I noticed strange scratches along the walls of my apartment as if something had tried to claw its way inside. I confronted my landlord again, desperate for answers, but all he offered was a grave look. "You should have left it alone," he muttered. "Not everyone who wanders into those woods comes back." Gradually, the residents of Maplewood began to fall into disarray, whispers transforming into outright concern. Children went missing, deepening the town's secrets and fears. The locals grew even more insular, warning one another about the woods, about the shadows that lurked within. As fate would have it, my curiosity blossomed once again, fueled by desperation and an unshakable sense that something crucial was slipping away. I began to piece together what little information I could find, a series of distressing events leading back to centuries of disappearances tied to the woods. One stormy night, compelled by an instinct I couldn't understand, I returned to the cabin. The wind howled like a wailing banshee as I approached, the trees twisting ominously overhead. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing a chilling darkness inside. I ventured forth, flashlight flickering, illuminating the path ahead. As I moved deeper into the cabin, a cacophony of whispers swirled around me, rising and falling, entwining with the wind. "Help me," they pleaded. "Find us." Before I could process the fear coursing through me, I understood. The shadows were the spirits of the missing, trapped between realms. They echoed the same haunting plea, and the realization struck me: death had not ended their torment, it had merely transformed it into something far darker. And just as I began to back away, I felt an icy grip on my arm, the gaunt woman from before materializing before me once more. Her hollow eyes burned with an urgency, as if imploring me to make a choice. With a surge of fear, I tore myself from her grasp. I bolted into the night, running blindly through the woods until I stumbled back onto the familiar path leading to Maplewood. I poured my energy into escaping the sinister grasp of the forest, knowing that the shadows of the past would forever haunt me unless I faced the truth. Each day thereafter, the whispers grew louder, a call to action that I could not ignore. In the dead of night, I gathered the courage to rally the townspeople, to tell my story, to remind them of what was lurking behind their guarded walls. We formed a group, armed with flashlights and resolve, ready to confront the darkness that had claimed so many lives. But as we entered the woods, I felt the grasp of fear clench my heart. The shadows danced around us, whispering tales of the lost, the missing, forever haunting us until we braved the truth hidden deep within the lingering shadows of Maplewood. I remember the night it all began like it was yesterday. The air was thick with tension as I pulled into my driveway, the shadows from the trees stretching like fingers across the moonlit ground. I had just returned from a long day at work, but a sense of unease nestled in my stomach. My home, a modest two-story house, stood eerily still, the kind of stillness that could swallow you whole. I was alone. My wife had taken the kids to visit her parents for a few days. I parked my car and stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my feet echoing through the dark. I glanced at the windows, expecting to see light spilling through, but the house was dark, a hollow shell waiting for me. As I entered, the door creaked ominously, and I flipped the switch for the hallway light, but it flickered and died. I shrugged it off, attributing it to a bulb needing replacement, but the sensation of being watched crept in from the edges of my mind. I proceeded to the kitchen, hoping the warm glow of the fridge light would soothe my frayed nerves. I poured myself a glass of water and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety gnawing at my insides. Sitting at the table, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the yard, but nothing stirred. Just the wind whispering through the trees. After a while, I decided to head upstairs to bed, taking one last look at the darkness beyond the kitchen window. The night felt heavy, as if it had a weight of its own. Climbing into bed, I pulled the covers tightly around me, seeking comfort in their warmth. Yet sleep eluded me. The silence of the house amplified every creak and groan, transforming them into sinister whispers. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. But as I lay there, I thought I heard a faint noise, a soft shuffling that seemed to come from downstairs. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the sound growing clearer, a faint rustling, like someone moving through my living room. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly got out of bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a burglar? Or something worse? I crept to the door, peering into the hallway, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadows stretched and danced as the moonlight cast an eerie glow across the walls, and I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. With shaky hands, I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the door. Gripping it tightly, I slowly made my way down the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. I could hear the rustling grow louder as I approached the living room, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But something inside pushed me forward. I reached the living room and turned on the light, squinting against the sudden brightness. The room was empty, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioner. I felt ridiculous, standing there, bat in hand, but a part of me felt a surge of relief. Maybe I was just imagining things. As I turned to head back upstairs, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting past the window. I froze, my heart dropping. I stepped closer, peering outside, but saw nothing. The yard was still, the darkness impenetrable. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Then I noticed something on the floor, a small object glimmering in the light. I bent down and picked it up, realizing it was a key, old and rusted, but familiar. It was the spare key I had hidden outside. I never took it out. Panic surged through me. Who had been here? I turned to look toward the back door, which led to the side of the house. It had been left slightly ajar. As dread filled my chest, instinct kicked in, and I moved quickly, locking the back door before stepping into the kitchen once more. My mind raced with thoughts of what I should do. I had no neighbors nearby, and calling the police felt like an admission of defeat. I decided to wait until morning. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me, and tried to reassure myself that everything was fine. I lay awake, clutching the bat like a lifeline, too terrified to sleep. Hours passed, each minute dragging on, the darkness swirling with all the scenarios my mind conjured. Then I heard it again, a soft thump from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were light and almost hesitant, but they resonated through the stillness like a beacon. My heart skipped, panic surging through me again as I gripped the bat tighter. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more. The footsteps grew closer, shuffling through rooms, and then a soft voice, barely above a whisper, called out my name. Come out, wherever you are. It was eerie, playful yet menacing, like a child playing a game. My stomach twisted, and I felt like I was going to be sick. It felt wrong, deeply wrong. Who's there? I managed to call out, but my voice was shaky, barely a whisper. The response was silence. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, and then I heard it again. A small giggle, chilling and distant, brushing against my ear. I remember the night it all began like it was yesterday. The air was thick with tension as I pulled into my driveway, the shadows from the trees stretching like fingers across the moonlit ground. I had just returned from a long day at work, but a sense of unease nestled in my stomach. My home, a modest two-story house, stood eerily still, the kind of stillness that could swallow you whole. I was alone. My wife had taken the kids to visit her parents for a few days. I parked my car and stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my feet echoing through the dark. I glanced at the windows, expecting to see light spilling through, but the house was dark, a hollow shell waiting for me. As I entered, the door creaked ominously, and I flipped the switch for the hallway light, but it flickered and died. I shrugged it off, attributing it to a bulb needing replacement, but the sensation of being watched crept in from the edges of my mind. I proceeded to the kitchen, hoping the warm glow of the fridge light would soothe my frayed nerves. I poured myself a glass of water and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety gnawing at my insides. Sitting at the table, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the yard, but nothing stirred. Just the wind whispering through the trees. After a while, I decided to head upstairs to bed, taking one last look at the darkness beyond the kitchen window. The night felt heavy, as if it had a weight of its own. Climbing into bed, I pulled the covers tightly around me, seeking comfort in their warmth. Yet sleep eluded me. The silence of the house amplified every creak and groan, transforming them into sinister whispers. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. But as I lay there, I thought I heard a faint noise, a soft shuffling that seemed to come from downstairs. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the sound growing clearer, a faint rustling, like someone moving through my living room. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly got out of bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a burglar? Or something worse? I crept to the door, peering into the hallway, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadows stretched and danced as the moonlight cast an eerie glow across the walls, and I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. With shaky hands, I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the door. Gripping it tightly, I slowly made my way down the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. I could hear the rustling grow louder as I approached the living room, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But something inside pushed me forward. I reached the living room and turned on the light, squinting against the sudden brightness. The room was empty, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioner. I felt ridiculous, standing there, bat in hand, but a part of me felt a surge of relief. Maybe I was just imagining things. As I turned to head back upstairs, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. a shadow darting past. The darkness seemed to envelop my very soul as I lay in bed, the familiar creaks of the old house morphing into a sinister symphony in the stillness of the night. I'd always been sensitive to the paranormal, a trait that left me both curious and terrified. My childhood was punctuated with whispered tales of ghostly encounters, but I never believed they would find me. It began on an insipid evening in late October, when the air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the world outside seemed to revel in the vibrant hues of autumn. I'd just returned home from work, the weight of the day still heavy on my shoulders. As I settled into the living room, the flickering candlelight was cozy, a stark contrast to the growing chill that seeped through the walls. Unbeknownst to me, however, that warmth would soon be overcome by an oppressive dread, a foreboding chill as if something was about to disturb the fragile peace of my home that I started with the whispers. At first, I dismissed them as figments of my imagination, a trick of the wind as it rustled the branches outside. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew clearer. They beckoned like an ethereal siren, pulling me towards the shadows that lurked in every corner. One evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine, the whispers coalesced into words, faint yet distinct. "Help me," it said, the voice echoing in my mind, a cold shiver racing down my spine. I felt a compulsion to respond, an inexplicable urge stemming from a deep well of empathy, though I was fearful of what lay beyond the veil of my reality. That night, sleep was elusive as I lay wrapped in my sheets, the unmistakable feeling of being watched creeping over me. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to echo louder in the silence, and my heart raced as I finally succumbed to exhaustion. I drifted into a dreamscape where I found myself in an old, decrepit house, eerily similar to my own. Shadows danced along the walls, and I was drawn deeper inside. The whispers rose around me like a swirling tempest, and in the thickening fog, a figure materialized. It was a woman, her face gaunt and hollow, her eyes filled with despair. She reached out towards me, her fingers trembling. "Please help me," she pleaded, her voice morphing into a scream that pierced the silence of my slumber that I jolted awake, gasping for air, drenched in a cold sweat. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I wondered if this was more than just a nightmare. Resolute in my need to uncover the truth, I researched the history of my home. The town had a grim past, filled with tales of lost souls and unspeakable acts. One story struck a chord, a woman named Eleanor, who lived here decades ago. Rumors circulated about her tragic demise. They said she was driven mad by the loss of her child, wandering the halls of her home, forever searching for him. The parallels between her story and my haunting were undeniable. As I read more, I felt an urge to connect with Eleanor, to offer her the comfort she had long been denied. Days turned into weeks, and the connection deepened. I began leaving objects around the house that held meaning, old toys, photographs, tokens of loss and love. With each gesture, the whispers grew softer, more grateful, as if I were honoring the ghost that lingered in my home. Yet, the line between our worlds began to blur. The nights became more haunting. Shadows shifted in the periphery of my vision, and I often caught glimpses of Eleanor. Her presence felt rather than seen, leaning against the walls, her expression one of eternal longing. I started to see the pain reflected in her hollow eyes, a longing that resonated within me. It was no longer just a specter. She was a being, yearning for solace. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows, I heard her voice again, a wail, heart-wrenching and filled with despair. My heart raced as I felt the air thicken, charged with an energy I could not comprehend. I followed the sound, my breath hitching in my throat, guiding me to the attic, a place I had long neglected. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, and as I pushed open the door, a musty scent filled my nostrils. The room was cloaked in shadows, illuminated only by the flickering light of my candle. In the far corner, a dusty old trunk lay hidden beneath a tattered blanket. Curiosity overwhelmed fear, and I approached it cautiously, my hands trembling. As I opened the trunk, the air around me crackled with energy. Inside lay a collection of old letters and faded photographs. I recognized the woman in the images, her youth bright and alive, but marred by sorrow in the latter pictures. I feverishly read the letters, each one a testament to her love for her lost child, a narrative of despair and longing that tore at my heart. The final letter was a plea. If you find this, please forgive me, for I have failed you. I am forever lost without you. It all clicked. The purpose of the whispers, the depth of her sorrow, the reason she lingered. My heart ached for her pain. I felt her agony wash over me. That night, I made a decision to help Eleanor find peace. With the first light of dawn breaking, I organized a small ceremony in the backyard, speaking her name aloud, honoring her story under the sprawling oak tree where the sun filtered through the leaves like a gentle embrace. I placed the letters and photos in a small wooden box, burying it deep beneath the roots, a final resting place for the echoes of her grief. As I covered the box with soil, I closed my eyes and whispered a promise. You are not forgotten. You will be remembered. The air felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted, and in that moment, I sensed her presence as a gentle brush of wind against my skin. The respite was palpable. The house felt calmer, as if Eleanor had finally found solace. The whispers faded, the shadows softened, and I could sleep once more without fear. Yet, sometimes late at night when the world is silent, I still feel a presence, a gentle connection that reminds me of the eternities we share, how the lines blur between our realms. I learned that sometimes all a lost soul needs is to be remembered, to know they are not forgotten. And even in the lingering echoes of the past, comfort can be found in the warmth of compassion and love, transcending the boundaries of life and death. I had always considered myself a rational person, someone who believed in logic and the tangible world. But that changed one fateful summer night, a night that still haunts me many years later. I was staying at my grandparents' old house in a quiet town, a place where whispers of the past seemed to linger in the air. The house creaked with age, every wooden floorboard holding secrets as if they were too afraid to leave. My grandmother had passed away a few years ago, and my grandfather had recently moved into a nursing home, leaving the house empty save for me in the shadows of memories. I spent my days cleaning and reminiscing, dusting off old family photos and trinkets that had long been forgotten. But as evening fell, the atmosphere turned oppressive, and a heaviness filled the air, almost as if the house were alive, breathing with a consciousness of its own. One night, while sitting in the dimly lit living room, I decided to explore the attic. The idea had always intrigued me, but I had put it off out of fear of what I might find. Curiosity won the battle on that night. I climbed the steep, narrow stairs, the rickety wood groaning under my weight. The attic was dark, illuminated only by the faint light peeking through a small, dusty window. As I stepped inside, the air grew cold, carrying with it the musty scent of forgotten memories. Boxes were strewn about, relics from a time long past, some covered in sheets, others left exposed, revealing their time-worn treasures. I sifted through them, each item holding a story of its own: a faded wedding dress, letters tied with frayed ribbons, a cracked porcelain doll with lifeless eyes that seemed to follow me. In one corner, I discovered an old trunk, its lock rusted but still intact. With effort, I managed to pry it open, and inside were bundles of yellowed papers and photographs. They were notes from my grandmother, recounting experiences from her youth, snippets of life that felt profoundly personal. Among them was a small, leather-bound journal. The moment I opened it, a shiver ran down my spine. The first page was dated long before I was born. The handwriting was elegant yet erratic, as if penned by someone in distress. I began to read, and the words drew me in like a moth to a flame. My grandmother wrote about a friend named Clara, a a girl who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. In the days that followed, I could sense my grandmother's desperation, clues she uncovered, conversations with townsfolk, and the eerie feeling that Clara's disappearance was not an isolated incident. As I continued to read, I embarked on a journey through the past, feeling as if I were walking beside my grandmother through those harrowing days filled with anxiety and dread. But then, the tone of the journal shifted. The entries grew darker as my grandmother wrote about hearing whispers in the night, phantom footsteps echoing through the home, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Each night, her dreams were filled with visions of Clara, her face twisted in fear, pleading for help. The once sweet memories turned sinister as I discovered that Clara had been last seen near the woods that bordered my grandparents' property, an expanse of trees that seemed to whisper secrets of their own when the wind blew just right. The more I read, the more a sense of unease settled over me. I felt drawn to those woods, a compulsion I couldn't shake off, as if they were calling to me. So, under the pale light of the moon, I ventured out, the cool night air wrapping around me like a shroud. The woods were dense, shadows dancing amongst the trees, and I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. With each step, the air grew heavier, the silence amplifying the sound of my heartbeat. I wandered deeper until I stumbled upon a clearing where the moonlight spilled in, illuminating a small mound covered in moss and wildflowers. Instinctively, I knelt before it, and a chill shot down my spine. I felt an inexplicable connection, as if the earth beneath me held secrets begging to be unearthed. As I reached out to touch the ground, my fingers brushed against something hard. When I pulled it free, I was shocked to find an old locket, rusty and tarnished, but still intact. Opening it, I found a photograph of Clara, her wide eyes staring back at me, filled with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Then came a whisper, the unmistakable sound of my name carried on the wind, soft yet piercing, sending a wave of terror through me. I ran back home, panic surging through my veins. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in my bed, the journal by my side, and listened to the creaks and groans of the house, now feeling more like a vessel of memories than a home. Just before dawn, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to awaken with a jolt. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was a shadowy figure. The room was shrouded in darkness, but I could make out the outline of a girl with disheveled hair and hollow eyes. My heart raced as I realized it was Clara. Her expression. I had always considered myself a rational person, someone who believed in logic and the tangible world. But that changed one fateful summer night, a night that still haunts me many years later. I was staying at my grandparents' old house in a quiet town, a place where whispers of the past seemed to linger in the air. The house creaked with age, every wooden floorboard holding secrets as if they were too afraid to leave. My grandmother had passed away a few years ago, and my grandfather had recently moved into a nursing home, leaving the house empty save for me in the shadows of memories. I spent my days cleaning and reminiscing, dusting off old family photos and trinkets that had long been forgotten. But as evening fell, the atmosphere turned oppressive, and a heaviness filled the air, almost as if the house were alive, breathing with a consciousness of its own. One night, while sitting in the dimly lit living room, I decided to explore the attic. The idea had always intrigued me, but I had put it off out of fear of what I might find. Curiosity won the battle on that night. I climbed the steep, narrow stairs, the rickety wood groaning under my weight. The attic was dark, illuminated only by the faint light peeking through a small, dusty window. As I stepped inside, the air grew cold, carrying with it the musty scent of forgotten memories. Boxes were strewn about, relics from a time long past, some covered in sheets, others left exposed, revealing their time-worn treasures. I sifted through them, each item holding a story of its own: a faded wedding dress, letters tied with frayed ribbons, a cracked porcelain doll with lifeless eyes that seemed to follow me. In one corner, I discovered an old trunk, its lock rusted but still intact. With effort, I managed to pry it open, and inside were bundles of yellowed papers and photographs. They were notes from my grandmother, recounting experience. When I was 23, I took a job as a night security guard at an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The building had been closed for over a decade, and rumors about the place ran rampant. They whispered about ghostly apparitions, strange noises echoing down the halls, and even sightings of a nurse who had vanished without a trace. I didn't believe in any of it, of course. I was just looking for a paycheck. As I settled into my new job, my nights were spent patrolling dimly lit corridors and peering into empty rooms, armed only with a flashlight and a sense of bravado. As the days turned into weeks, however, I began to feel an unsettling presence that clawed at the edges of my rationality. The first sign was the sounds that echoed through the otherwise silent halls. At first, it was just the groan of the building settling, but then I began hearing whispers, soft and unintelligible, always just out of reach. It felt as if someone, or something, was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I chalked it up to exhaustion and the imagination that comes with too many late nights. But as the weeks went by, I grew increasingly uneasy. I started to notice that my flashlight would flicker and dim, only to blaze brightly when I aimed it toward the shadows. One night, while sitting at my desk in the security office, I caught sight of a flicker at the end of a long corridor. My heart raced, but I steeled myself to investigate. I made my way down the corridor, the beam of my flashlight revealing peeling paint and rusted hospital equipment. Just as I approached the source of the flicker, it disappeared. I took a deep breath, convincing myself that it was likely just a trick of the light or my eyes playing games. Yet, the feeling of being watched intensified. I could almost feel the air turn thick, suffocating, as though something malignant lurked just outside my line of sight. One particular night, while conducting my rounds, I heard a faint sound, a soft sobbing echoing from the pediatric ward. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. It was probably just the wind, I rationalized, or maybe a stray animal outside. But deep down, something pulled at me, urging me to investigate. I took a few hesitant steps toward the ward, the sobbing growing clearer, and the air thick with a sort of tragic despair. When I pushed open the door, what met me was nothing but darkness and emptiness. The room lay silent, the only sound my own breathing. Yet as I turned to leave, I glanced back. That's when I saw it, a flicker of white at the corner of my vision. I spun around, and there, for the briefest moment, I saw her. A girl, no older than 7, dressed in a faded hospital gown, her hair wild and tangled, tears streaming down her pale face. She seemed to be staring directly at me, her expression a mix of sadness and fear. My stomach dropped. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was imagining things, yet the girl remained anchored in my mind. I backed away slowly, not daring to turn my back on her as I exited the ward, my heart pounding in my chest. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. I tried to focus on my rounds, but every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I couldn't shake the image of that girl, nor could I dismiss the sobbing that lingered in my ears. Days turned into a week, and I found myself increasingly distracted. During one of my shifts, I decided to research the hospital, hoping to understand its dark past. What I learned chilled me to the bone. The pediatric ward had once housed terminally ill children, many of whom had died alone and in pain. A few documents mentioned a little girl named Alice. She had been one of the last to succumb, her family having vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had returned, seeking something from me. When the night came for my next shift, I braced myself for the inevitable encounters. To my surprise, the beginning was quiet. I patrolled the halls, my nerves slightly less frayed, until I reached the pediatric ward once more. It felt different this time. The air was charged, electric, a sense of urgency hanging in the atmosphere. I stepped inside, my heart racing, calling out in a shaky voice, "Alice." The sobbing began again, weaving through the silence. I followed the sound to the room where I had first seen her, and, standing in the doorway, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow wash over me, like a tangible cloud hovering in the air. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Just then, the temperature dropped drastically, and I saw her again. Only this time, she seemed closer. Her lips formed words that I couldn't hear but felt deep within me. Tears sprang to my eyes as I wondered if she was warning me of something. In that instant, the door slammed shut behind me, echoing ominously in the chamber. Panic surged through my veins as I tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back, my eyes wide with terror, to see the girl now standing directly in front of me, her expression pleading. I felt a rush of compassion mixed with fear. "Please," I begged. "What do you want from me?" The sobbing ceased and the weight of her sorrow filled the room, an unbearable heaviness pressing down on my chest. Suddenly, she pointed to the wall behind me. Confused and desperate, I turned to look, expecting to see something terrible or incredible. Instead, I saw what appeared to be a faded handprint, small and delicate, tinged with age. It resonated with a sense of unfinished business. My heart raced as I realized she was trying to communicate something important. "You're trapped? Are you waiting for someone?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. The girl nodded slowly, her tear-stained cheeks glowing faintly in the dim light. At that moment, I understood. She was not just a specter of sorrow. She was a little girl, yearning to be found. In that revelation, a swell of adrenaline coursed through me, igniting my determination. I had to help her find peace. I frantically searched for anything that might indicate where her family had gone, focusing on scouring old files scattered throughout the facility. Hours passed, my mind racing, each moment weighed heavily by the girl's presence until I stumbled upon a dusty file folder marked Alice Thompson. Inside, I found records of her family, her mother's frantic pleas for help, a list of visitors who had never come, and, most chilling of all, a heartfelt letter, never sent, filled with anguished words of love and loss. As I read the letter aloud in the empty ward, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, like a heavy blanket lifting. The temperature began to rise, and I could see the girl slowly fade, her expression transforming from one of sorrow to a serene look. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice the slightest breath on the wind. In the blink of an eye, she was gone, leaving me standing in the now still room, entirely alone. That night changed everything for me. I understood that darkness could exist even after death, that it often clung like a shadow to unfinished stories and lost souls. With renewed purpose, I felt compelled to share her story, to ensure that Alice's family and her pain would never be forgotten. From that night on, I no longer feared the ghostly whispers. Instead, I learned to listen, to understand the cries for help hidden within the silence. The hospital remained standing, but I left my post with a new understanding that even the darkest places can harbor flickers of hope. It was a rainy evening when I first experienced the true horror of solitude. I had recently moved into an old house, secluded on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town. The townsfolk had given me odd looks when I mentioned I was moving in, a crumbling Victorian relic, a once grand structure that had seen better days. They whispered about its past, shrouded in both tragedy and mystery, but I brushed it off. I was an artist looking for inspiration, hoping the old walls would spark my creativity. Little did I know, the inspiration I sought would come at a terrible price. The first week passed uneventfully. I painted during the day, letting the soft light filtering through dusty windows guide my brush. But as night fell, an unsettling presence seemed to creep with the darkness. The sound of the wind howling through the eaves echoed like voices whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. I told myself it was just the house settling, the creaks and groans of aged wood. Yet, each night, as I lay in bed, I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, as if eyes were watching from the corners of the dimly lit rooms. One particularly stormy night, I decided to explore the attic, lured by a feeling I couldn't explain. The narrow staircase leading up was steep, and the air grew colder with each step I took. Upon reaching the top, I found myself surrounded by dust-covered furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. My breath hung in the air as I moved cautiously among the relics, feeling a heavy weight in the atmosphere. Then, I noticed a small chest tucked away in a corner, its wood darkened with age. My heart raced with curiosity. I pulled it into the light, the creaking of its hinges sounding like a warning as I carefully opened the chest. Inside lay a collection of photographs, yellowing and brittle, depicting a family from another era. The faces were kind yet haunting, especially one woman, a mother, whose eyes seemed to follow me wherever I moved. There was something about her expression that sent chills down my spine. Among the photographs was a diary, its pages frayed and yellowed. Unable to resist, I opened it and began to read. The entries detailed a family's gradual descent into despair, plagued by tragedy and loss. The mother wrote about an overwhelming feeling of dread that enveloped their home, and how her children began to see things, figures lurking at the edges of their vision, whispers in the night that grew louder, tormenting them. With each entry, her handwriting grew more erratic and frantic. The last entry sent shivers down my spine. It watches. It wants our souls. Just as I was about to put the diary down, the lights flickered violently. In the darkness, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move at the edge of my vision, long and thin, almost like a person, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Heart racing, I slammed the chest shut and stumbled back down the stairs, convinced I had disturbed something I shouldn't have. The following days devolved into a blur of paranoia. I heard noises that couldn't easily be explained, muffled voices, footsteps in empty rooms. Shadows danced against the walls, slipping just beyond the reach of the light. I tried to paint, but every stroke felt heavy and laden with a darkness that stifled creativity. My mind grew frayed, each night more torturous than the last. Then one night, while lying in bed, I felt the unmistakable presence beside me. I felt the weight of a hand resting on my shoulder, icy fingers digging into my skin. I dared not turn around. I could feel its breath, cold and rancid, brushing against my neck. A low voice murmured something unintelligible, filling my mind with dread. I leapt from my bed, my heart pounding so fiercely that I thought it might burst. I sprinted down the hall, desperate for escape, but as I reached the front door, it slammed shut, obstructing my path. Panicked, I turned to face the darkness behind me. The air grew thick, oppressive, and I felt suffocated. Suddenly, a vision flooded my mind, the mother from the photographs, her eyes now filled with despair, her mouth moving silently as she pointed towards a corner of the room. Frozen in place, I looked where she directed, and slowly, the shadows began to coalesce, shaping into a figure that embodied every nightmare I had ever feared. Its eyes burned like embers, hollow and devoid of mercy. It opened its mouth and let out a sound that felt like a physical blow, a chorus of wails and cries that echoed through the very marrow of my bones. I turned to flee, but the weight of despair enveloped me. I felt the cold fingers gripping my arms, dragging me back into the dark. I screamed, a sound swallowed by the oppressive gloom. In that moment, something inside me broke. My mind shattered, and with a final burst of strength, I surged forward, pushing against the door until it flew open. The storm outside had intensified. Rain lashed at my skin as I stumbled into the night, gasping for breath. I ran through the downpour, never daring to look back, leaving the house and its horrors behind. Days turned into weeks as I found refuge in a small motel in the town. But even there, I felt its presence lurking at the edges of my consciousness. I could hear the whispers in the rain, the soft murmur warning me that it wasn't done with me yet. I knew then that the darkness I had encountered was not simply a specter of the house, it had become part of me. No matter where I went, I carried that lingering fear, the memory of its cold touch haunting my every step. I never returned to that house. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the soft whispers of the past, and I wonder if it truly watches, if it still wants my soul. It began on a chilly autumn evening, when the fading light cast long shadows across the ground and the air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and impending rain. I returned to my family's old farmhouse after years of being away, lured back by a sense of nostalgia and the lingering feeling of unresolved memories. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of time, every sound echoing through the empty rooms like whispers from the past. As I unpacked, I noticed the unsettling stillness surrounding me, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of the wind outside. It wasn't long before I found myself drawn to the attic, a place I had avoided as a child due to the stories my parents told, stories of a presence that haunted the upper levels. With an inexplicable curiosity gnawing at me, I climbed the narrow, winding staircase, my heart pounding with both fear and excitement. The attic door, old and weathered, creaked open, revealing a dusty, dimly lit space filled with forgotten relics of my childhood. As I ventured further inside, I stumbled upon a peculiar chest tucked away in the corner, its surface adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to come alive in the flickering light. With trembling hands, I opened the chest, revealing a collection of faded photographs, each depicting moments from my family's history, vacations, birthdays, and celebrations that felt like a lifetime ago. But there was something odd about these photographs, an unsettling vibe that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. In each photo, a shadowy figure lurked just at the edge of the frame, its features indistinguishable yet undeniably present. I shivered, feeling a chill sweep through the attic as if the very air around me had thickened with something malevolent. Compelled by an overwhelming urge to know more, I began to examine the contents of the chest more closely. Beneath the photographs was an old journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with a delicate script that belonged to my grandmother. Leafing through the pages, I discovered entries chronicling her fearful encounters with the shadowy figure, which she believed was a warning and omen of tragedy that had plagued our family for generations. Each entry was laced with anxiety, describing incidents that escalated from small disturbances to terrifying events that left her feeling trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As I read on, the reality of her experiences seeped into my consciousness, scratching noises from the walls, whispers in the dead of night, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach as I realized that the last entry was dated just days before her untimely death. The pages ended abruptly, leaving my mind reeling with questions about what had truly occurred. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed through the attic, and I spun around, heart racing. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but a morbid curiosity anchored my feet to the ground. That's when I noticed the figure again, lurking in the shadows, its outline barely discernible but its presence unmistakable. Time seemed to freeze as I stared into the darkness, feeling its gaze piercing through me. Panic washed over me, and I rushed down the stairs, nearly stumbling in my haste, desperate to escape the chilling air of the attic. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, a trick of the light, perhaps, a figment of my imagination fueled by years of family lore. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong, and my unease only grew as night fell and the house settled into silence. Lying in bed, I was plagued by a sense of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, every whisper of wind creeping through the cracks as reminders of the entity that had awoken in my family's legacy. Sleep eluded me as I replayed my grandmother's words in my mind, the weight of her fear pressing down on me like an anchor. Then, just as exhaustion began to take hold, I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the attic, rhythmic and insistent. It sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to confront whatever was tormenting my family, to face the truth that had lingered in the shadows for far too long. The fear that clutched at my heart was paralyzing, but a surge of determination propelled me out of bed. I grabbed a flashlight and ascended the stairs once more, each step echoing in the stillness of the house. I flicked the switch on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the attic. The tapping persisted, a frantic insistence that compelled me closer to the source. My heart thundered in my chest as I approached the corner where I had found the chest. And then I saw it. The shadowy figure stood before me, its form shifting and undulating with a malevolence that was almost palpable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as it turned to face me, a dark void where its face should have been. But then, an odd sense of recognition washed over me. It was as if I was looking into a distorted reflection of myself, a lost part that had been waiting to be acknowledged. In that moment of clarity, I realized that this entity wasn't just a figment of my family's fears. It was a manifestation of our collective grief and unresolved trauma, an echo of the pain that had haunted generations. Tears stung my eyes as I finally understood what had to be done. I needed to confront not only my family's past, but my own. I stepped closer, feeling a warmth envelop me as I reached out my hand, ready to embrace the darkness instead of fleeing from it. The tapping ceased, and for the first time, an overwhelming sense of peace washed over the room. I faced the figure with an open heart, ready to listen to its story, to acknowledge the hurt that had bound our family in fear for so long. The shadows began to dissipate, revealing fragments of memories intertwined, loss, sorrow, love, and pain. In that moment of connection, I understood that we were not bound by our fears, but tethered by our shared experiences, and the entity that had haunted us was, in essence, a distorted reflection of our intertwined histories. With each gasp of breath, I felt an unburdening, years of anguish lifting away, leaving space for healing. As dawn broke, spilling golden light into the attic, I found myself standing alone where darkness had thrived for so long. The weight of the past, while still present, transformed from a source of terror into a quiet understanding. That day, I left the attic forever changed, knowing that while the shadows would always exist, they no longer held power over me. Instead, they served as a reminder of the strength that lay in facing our fears, an inheritance I would carry forward, transforming the legacy of hauntings into a renewed sense of hope for the future. The night was unusually quiet as I settled into my small, dimly lit apartment. I had just moved to this secluded town a few weeks prior, hoping to escape the chaos of city life. I found comfort in the silence and the lack of constant noise that had become a background hum in my previous existence. However, as days faded into weeks, I began to sense something unsettling lurking beneath the surface of my newfound tranquility. It started with the whispers. At first, I brushed them off as figments of my imagination, perhaps remnants of an overactive mind that was unaccustomed to such stillness. I would hear faint murmurs echoing through the walls during the late hours of the night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep. My mind would race with shadows of thoughts, conjuring possibilities of the previous tenants who could have left traces of their lives embedded within these walls. Each night, I became more curious than frightened, convinced that I was simply inventing stories to entertain the void. One evening, compelled by a cocktail of dread and curiosity, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I stepped into the dark corridor of my building, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as I reached the source of the sounds, a door at the end of the hall that had been closed since I arrived. It was slightly ajar, and a subtle flicker of light seeped out, beckoning me closer. My heart raced with adrenaline as I pushed the door open, revealing a small room cluttered with old furniture and dust-covered belongings. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest, yet there was a distinct clarity to the murmur of a woman grieving. Suddenly, all the warmth from the room vanished as I stepped inside, replaced by an overwhelming chill that prickled at my skin. I scanned my surroundings, and the unsettling truth dawned on me. The room was filled with remnants of a life cut short, perhaps by tragedy or despair. Faded photographs lined the walls, black and white images of a woman holding a baby, a smiling family gathered around a modest dinner table, and the image of a young girl with bright, innocent eyes. I felt their stories tugging at the edges of my conscience, urging me to listen, to understand. As I stood frozen, the whispers started to coalesce into coherent words, revealing a heart-wrenching tale of loss. The woman, the mother, had suffered a fate I couldn't yet fathom, but I felt her pain resonate through me, solidifying my resolve to uncover the truth behind her sorrow. The whispers filled the room, recounting her life, her dreams, and ultimately, the tragedy that shattered her world. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, a connection between her spirit and my living presence. Days turned into weeks as I delved deeper into the mystery of the former tenant. I spoke to neighbors who mentioned her in hushed tones, their eyes clouded with pity and fear. I learned that she had lost her daughter in a car accident, a senseless tragedy that had left her shattered. People said she had never been the same after that day, that the grief consumed her until she was little more than a ghost haunting her own life. As I pieced together her story, I felt an inexplicable bond with her. I could feel her sadness echoing within me, the weight of her loss wrapping around my heart like a shroud. It was on a stormy night that the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder growled like an ominous beast. I lay in bed, barely able to sleep, my mind consumed with visions of the woman's grief. The whispers came again, louder, more urgent, as if the very walls were crying out for help. I sat up, trembling, and felt an icy breeze wash over me, extinguishing the feeble light from my bedside lamp. And there she was, standing at the foot of my bed, translucent and fragile. Her eyes were filled with a profound sadness that was palpable, and I instinctively knew this was the mother, still tethered to this world by her unfathomable grief. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, to tell her that I understood, but fear gripped my heart like a vice. Instead, I could only watch as she lifted a finger, pointing towards the corner of the room, an expression of anguish etched upon her ethereal face. In that moment, I was struck with an overwhelming need to help her find peace. It wasn't enough to simply acknowledge her sorrow. I needed to uncover what had gone wrong, to reveal the hidden truth behind her daughter's death. With each passing day, I scoured newspapers, visited the local library, and spoke to anyone who would listen, slowly piecing together a narrative that the town seemed to want to forget. I discovered that the driver that had taken her daughter's life had vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions and a grieving mother left to bear the unbearable. As the anniversary of the accident approached, I knew time was running out. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, calling for recognition and resolution. The stormy night returned, mirroring the darkness that permeated my own heart. I stood in the small room where I had first encountered the mother's spirit, now more determined than ever. It was there, surrounded by memories that were not my own, that I finally felt her presence enveloping me in a gentle embrace. I closed my eyes, willing myself to connect with her grief, willing her to feel the hope that there could be closure, that her child's memory could finally be honored. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and the walls trembled violently, revealing the turbulence of emotions locked within. I knew in my bones that this was the moment we had to confront the truth together. I summoned all my courage, calling out to her, reminding her that through our shared sorrow, healing could begin. The air grew. It was a damp and drizzly evening when I moved into my new apartment, an old building that had seen better days. The creaky floorboards and the peeling wallpaper gave it a charm that appealed to my artistic sensibilities, masking the unsettling aura that lurked beneath. My friends had warned me about the place, whispering tales of the previous tenant who had vanished without a trace, but I shrugged it off, dismissing it as mere urban legend. After all, I needed a fresh start, and the low rent was hard to overlook. The first few nights passed peacefully, save for the usual city sounds filtering through the thin walls, traffic, distant sirens, the occasional laughter of neighbors. But then, I started to notice things out of the ordinary, strange noises in the dead of night that seemed to echo through the empty halls, a shadow flitting past my peripheral vision when alone in my living room, and little things misplaced like my keys and books often turning up in different rooms. At first, I attributed it to my adjustment to the new space, perhaps the residue of a frantic moving day. But as the days turned to weeks, the atmosphere thickened, and a sense of dread settled in my chest. It began with whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that filled the silence of my apartment at midnight. I told myself it was the wind or my imagination playing tricks, but each night the whispers grew more distinct, a chorus of voices that crept beneath my skin. One evening, drawn by a compulsion I could not explain, I ventured into the building's basement, a dark, musty expanse that seemed untouched by time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and faintly, I could hear the low hum of something not quite right. I felt an urge to explore, stepping over debris and faded remnants of past lives, peering into corners that seemed to swallow the light. In the far end of the basement, I discovered an old trunk, covered in dust and cobwebs. Curiosity overpowered caution, and with shaking hands, I pried it open, revealing its morbid contents, dilapidated photographs of the previous tenant, a woman with hollow eyes and a smile that did not reach her lips. As I sifted through the items, a gnawing feeling unfurled inside me. It was as if the air had shifted, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I quickly slammed the trunk shut, but a vibration tingled in my fingertips and a whisper rose louder than before, as if whatever dormant energy lay within the trunk had awakened something else. That night, I was awoken by the sound of something dragging across the wooden floor, insistent and methodical, the noise breaking my uneasy sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sound to be a figment of my imagination, but it continued, haunting, unrelenting. Mustering my courage, I forced myself to the hallway, clutching a flashlight that flickered in the oppressive dark. The air felt cold, the temperature dropping a few degrees as I approached the source of the sound. My heart raced as I directed the beam ahead, illuminating the long corridor lined with faded wallpaper, shadows dancing along the walls like souls caught between realms. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the far end, motionless yet pulsating with a malignant energy. With a jolt of adrenaline, I turned to flee, but the ground beneath me seemed to wrench away, and I stumbled. For hours, I lay awake, listening to the whispers of the woman from the photographs, each voice entwining around me, pulling me into an abyss of despair. I could feel her sorrow, her anger, her plea for help, a desperate cry that echoed through time, searching for solace in a world that had forgotten her. I knew I had to leave, but an invisible tether kept me bound to the apartment, a haunting familiarity that tangled with my heartstrings. I spent days grappling with the decision, researching the building's history, unearthing scattered stories of unfortunate tenants who had come and gone, lives marred by tragedy. Each account twisted the knife deeper, the suicides, the disappearances, the whispers of ghosts lingering beyond the veil of death. The apartment was a vessel of pain, a shrine of sorrow that fed on the souls of its inhabitants. Finally, I decided to confront the spirit that had woven itself into my life, hoping to free both of us from this torment. Armed with candles and an old mirror, I set up a makeshift altar, lighting the candles one by one while chanting words learned from ancient texts, summoning her presence. As the flames flickered, the temperature in the room plummeted, and I felt her icy breath near my neck. The whispers became a cacophony, drowning my thoughts, pleading for release, for acknowledgement. In that moment of desperation, I gazed into the mirror, seeing her reflection materialize behind me, her face contorted in anguish, trapped in an endless loop of despair. I reached out, trembling, trying to form a connection, and all at once, the air surged with energy as our worlds collided. I felt her pain, her loss, the memories of a life stolen too early, and tears streamed down my face as I understood her plight. Together, we cried out, a primal scream that resonated through the building and shattered the silence. In that moment, I felt a weight lift, her essence intertwining with mine before dissipating into a gentle breeze. The shadows pulled back, and the air grew warm. I gasped for breath, feeling as if I had been set free, her spirit finally at rest. I left the apartment the next day, never to return. I took with me the memories, both haunting and beautiful, a story etched into my soul, a reminder that sometimes, in confronting our fears, we can also help others find their peace.